At this time, the court calls State of Wisconsin versus Stephen Avery, case number 05CF381. We are here this morning for the continuation of the trial in this matter. Will the parties again state their appearance for the record?
State appears by Calumet County District Attorney Ken Kratz, Assistant Attorney General Tom Fallon, and Assistant DA Norm Gahn, all appearing as special prosecutors.
Good morning. Stephen Avery is here in person again, and Jerome Buting and Dean Strang representing him.
All right, I will indicate for the record that before we began, I met in chambers with counsel, briefly to discuss the agenda for the day. It is my understanding that after we bring the jury out, the state is going to first complete the demonstration associated with the last witness yesterday, in the form of an animation, and that the parties are agreeable to the state presenting that animation without Mr. Austin being recalled to the stand.
That's right. I understand it's just going to be played once straight through without narration, and that's fine.
Okay, and the parties were also discussing a potential stipulation for the court relating to the testimony of the next witness.
Judge, the prosecution team has discussed that. We would entertain such a stipulation, but only after we hear what the cross-examination is for this next witness. The state is unwilling to enter into a stipulation at this time, but I will candidly tell the court that if the cross goes as expected and as represented, it is very likely that we will agree to that request. Yeah.
All right, Mr. Strang.
I can't force a stipulation.
Okay, very well. We'll address that matter then after we complete Mr. Dassey's testimony. Anything else to take up before we bring in the jury? Anything else before we bring in the jury, counsel?
No, Your Honour.
I don't think so, Judge.
All right, the jury can be brought in. You may be seated. Members of the jury, before we get started with the first witness today, you may recall that there was a short animation scheduled to be shown at the end of Mr. Austin's testimony yesterday. I am informed that the technical difficulties have now been ironed out and counsel has agreed to present the animation to the jury without recalling Mr. Austin to the stand. Is that correct, counsel?
Yes, Judge.
All right, Mr. Kratz, you may proceed.
For the record, Judge, that was exhibit number 117. That's all we have for Trooper Austin. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you. And before we took the testimony of Mr. Austin yesterday, I believe we left out with the cross-examination of Bobby Dassey. So at this time, you can bring Mr. Dassey in and the defence can begin with their cross-examination.
Can we approach just briefly?
Sure. Members of the jury, as you can see, the picture on the computer screen there is a little out of the kilter. We have a technical person who is going to adjust the projector.
It sounds like it's a setting on the projector. It's something during the break that the text can take care of.
All right.
Can you switch that over to Elmo?
Sure.
Please raise your right hand. Please be seated. Please state your name and spell your last name for the record.
Bobby Dassey, Dassey.
Good morning. Welcome back.
Good morning.
Did you grow up on a salvage yard that you described living at yesterday?
Just my high school years in school.
That is, you were living with your mum?
Yes.
With Barb Jander?
Yes.
You described your stepdad yesterday, right?
Yeah, Tom.
His name was Tom. Is Tom Jander?
Yes.
Your mum is now married to another fellow named Scott Taddick?
Yes.
You are the second of 4 boys?
Yes.
All of you have the last name Dassey?
Yes.
From Pete Dassey?
Yes.
Your natural father?
Yes.
And Brian is older than you?
Yes.
Then there is you, Bobby.
Yep.
All right. Then we have got Brendan. No, I'm sorry. We have got Blaine.
Yep.
And Brendan is the youngest of the four brothers.
Yes.
So Brian, the eldest boy, oldest son, already was out of Barb's house back on Halloween 2005.
Yes. He would come and go once in a while.
He lived nearby but didn't sleep there most nights.
Yeah.
So you and your two younger brothers were still living with your mum, Barb Yander.
Yes.
You have been there since about the time you began high school?
Yes. 2001, we moved in.
Were you living in the mobile home?
Yes.
Same one, same place?
Yes.
Stephen Avery, who lived just to the west of you, is your uncle?
Yes.
Your mum's brother?
Yes.
And then you also had an Uncle Chuck living on the salvage yard property?
Yes.
That's also your mum's brother?
Yes.
And he lives back around to the southeast, sort of behind the office buildings and the other buildings on the business, right?
Yes.
In a trailer home there?
Yes.
Grandpa and Grandma live there?
Yes.
That is your mum's mother and father?
Yes.
Alan and Dolores?
Yes.
Them in the back?
Yep.
Okay. And they live up right off the parking lot in the main area of the business?
Yes.
They have a double wide trailer?
Yes.
And a garage attached?
Yes.
Or at least next
Next. Yeah.
to the trailer, you also have an Uncle Earl, your mother's brother, Earl, don't you?
Yes.
Earl is married to a woman named Candy?
Yes.
Earl and Candy don't live on a salvage yard
Oh, no. No.
property. They live nearby too?
Yes.
And Earl, in fact, you know, works at the salvage yard.
Yes.
Chuck works at the salvage yard?
Yes.
And after Steve got out of prison, he came to work at the salvage yard.
Yes.
Your grandpa Alan had started the salvage yard,
Yes.
but he is not quite as active. The adult boys are basically running the business.
Yes.
Your mum works elsewhere.
Yes.
And back about Halloween of 2005, she had a factory job.
Yes.
Did she work first shift?
Yes.
So she's up and out of the house pretty early in the morning.
Yes.
About the time you were getting home, probably.
Before.
Back then, before you even got home.
Yeah.
Okay. So you were getting off work at 6 in the morning from your third shift.
Yep.
And by the time you were at home at 6:15, 6:30, she's already gone.
Yeah.
She would then come home mid-afternoon.
Yes.
What goes on at a salvage yard business, Mr. Dassey?
Well, they sell used parts for cars for the people that need these parts.
Okay. Do they also do some car repair?
Oh, once in a while, yeah.
Okay. Did you ever work for the salvage yard?
For one summer.
I mean, for wages?
Yeah.
Okay. What did you do that summer you worked at the salvage yard?
I just changed colors. I mean, changed tires and stripped cars.
What do you mean by stripping cars?
Taking off all the stuff that you can get money for off them.
After you have stripped the car, taken all the valuable spare parts off, where do the things you stripped off go?
Into piles.
Where does the rest of the car go?
It goes down to be crushed.
Okay. And some of the cars now look like they are lined up in rows and they are not crushed. Is that the area you guys call the pit?
Yes.
And why are some of the cars not crushed but just lined up in rows down there?
Well, because there are cars that are still good that they can still sell stuff off of.
You can still strip some parts off of.
Yes.
Some of them pretty old,
Oh, yes.
others pretty new.
Yes.
How do cars get to come to the salvage yard? How is it that a car would end up there?
People call them. They go pick it up.
The Avery salvage business runs a wrecker
Oh, yes.
or towing service?
Yes.
Okay, so let's say there is a car crash and one or both of the cars is totaled. Might those end up at the salvage yard?
Yes, if they're called.
By a police department or a fire department or
Yeah.
private people?
Yeah.
Any of those?
Yeah.
Okay. You saw wrecked cars, and that is cars that have been in a crash, come in the summer you worked there.
Yes.
Some of those cars, because there's been a car crash, some of them have blood in them.
Yes.
And are there any parts from a car when you are stripping it that you might melt down?
Yes.
What would that be?
Like aluminum,
What's aluminum on a car?
like rims, transmission, all that stuff.
Transmission is probably the biggest cast aluminium
Yes.
piece on a car. Does the Avery salvage yard have a place to melt down aluminium rims
Yes.
or aluminium transmissions?
Yes.
Where is that?
It is in the old shop building.
Up around that parking lot area?
Yes.
And what is this thing that melts down the aluminium transmission?
It's called a smelter.
Okay. Big thing, small thing? Have you ever seen how it works?
It's pretty big.
Do you know how it works?
It is heated by propane. That's all I really know.
There's a big outdoor propane tank next to it.
Yep.
And you say people would come down there to buy spare parts. Are these just people who are maybe fixing their own car in the garage
Yes.
or restoring an older car or something like that? Hobby type people,
Yes.
independent, small repair garage people. Do they ever come by to buy parts or put on cars that they may be fixing for customers of theirs?
Yes.
One of the cars that we have seen over and over again, I think that you talked about, was this maroon, I think you said 1989 Plymouth Voyager minivan.
Yes.
That was your mum's car, and you know that.
Yes.
It was for sale back around Halloween 2005.
Yes.
That Stephen was helping her sell it.
Yes.
Did it eventually sell?
No.
At the same time that one was for sale, were you aware of other cars that may have been for sale on or off the, for sale, whether they were actively advertised or not?
Yes.
Such as?
Stephen had a Chevy Blazer for sale and a Monte Carlo
Where were those kept, if you know?
up at the end of our driveway.
This was back around Halloween of 2005.
Yes.
At the end of your driveway, do you mean there's a road that comes down if you take a right instead of going into the salvage yard business? There is a road
Yes.
that runs east-west there near the north side of the property.
Yes.
Is that the driveway you were referring to?
Yes.
That actually goes down to a little loop driveway in front of your house
Yes.
and then sort of goes into Stephen's garage.
Yes.
So it would have been up toward the main road, so to speak,
Yes.
by the entrance to the business
mailbox.
or the entrance to the office.
Yes.
Now, yesterday, Mr. Kratz asked you about a conversation that happened in your garage with your friend Mike was there?
Yeah.
Is Mike Osmondson
Yes.
or Michael Osmondson, but you call him Mike?
Yes.
Okay. How do you know you were in the garage, your garage, when this conversation happened?
Because we just arrived home and we entered the garage.
What was going on in the garage?
We bought some climbing sticks that night for hunting, and we were putting them together.
Climbing sticks are little sticky pads you put on the rungs to climb up a deer stand?
Yes.
So your boots don't slip and you fall off and break your neck?
Yes.
You were doing that with Mike in the garage?
Yes.
Roughly what time? Do you remember you guys were doing this?
Probably 6:30, 7.
Somewhere in that range.
Yes.
And was there a deer?
Yes.
Okay. This was a deer that was hanging at that point
Yes.
in the garage. Was the deer skun out?
No, not at that time.
The time of this conversation had not been skinned yet,
Yes.
or had been.
It hadn't.
When did you get this deer?
That night.
And how long, or how did you get that deer?
It was a roadkill. It was hit right up the road and from our house.
Now, when you get a roadkill, you can't just take that home and eat it necessarily, can you?
No.
You have got to get a tag in this state
Yes.
from the DNR.
Yes.
You had not hit the deer,
No.
but you saw it hit
Yes.
and knew it was a fresh kill.
Yes.
So you put it on your truck,
Yes.
brought it home,
Yes.
and it was too late at that point to get the tag.
Yes.
Did you hang it up that first night?
Yes.
Who called to get the tag?
My mom did.
And do you remember whether she called to get the tag, called about the tag the night you first found the deer or the next day?
The night we found the deer.
But you didn't get the tag until the next morning.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to show you Exhibit 123. Can you make out what it is?
That's a tag.
A tag for the deer that was hanging in your garage.
Yes.
When you had this conversation with Mike,
Yes.
okay, while you were putting the climbing sticks on,
Yes.
all right. Now, the tag is dated November 4 or 11/4/05, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. So where did you get the tag?
From 310 Mobile.
You will have to explain that. At least some of the juries may not understand this. It's a DNR tag, right?
Yes.
But the DNR sets it up so that there are local agents or places you can go.
Gas stations.
Gas stations where you can get the tag.
Yes.
So you don't have to run to Madison or something.
Yes.
Okay. And there's a mobile gas station on Highway 310 near your house.
Yes.
And that's what you call the mobile 310.
Yes.
Did you take the deer to the mobile 310 to get it tagged?
Yes.
So you had to take it down from where it was hanging in your garage.
Yes.
For anybody who doesn't know, why do you hang a deer?
It helps cure the meat.
And do you hang it before you skin it or after you skin it or both?
I usually hang it and skin it, and then you let it hang for a day.
Okay. But you didn't skin it the first night you had it
No.
because you had to get it tagged.
Yes.
So you took it down the morning of the 4th of November.
Yes.
Went and got it tagged yourself.
Yes.
And I want to be clear about that. Even though your mom had called about the tag, you actually took the deer to get it tagged
Yes.
because she was off to work on a Friday morning.
Yes.
November 4 was Friday.
Yes.
Now, you bring the deer back and you have the deer tagged, I assume, right?
Yes.
What did you do with the deer at that point?
I hung it up again and skun it out.
Okay. And was it that night you hung it up again and skun it out that you had this conversation with Mike?
No, it was the night before.
The night before?
Yes.
Okay. You remember talking to us last night
Yes.
and telling us that it was the second time you hung the deer and the deer was skun out when you were doing the climbing sticks?
Yes.
You remember that the conversation with Mike happened after the news of Teresa Holbeck's disappearance had been on TV,
Yes.
that you are certain of
Yes. It was that day.
after it was on TV.
Yes.
Okay. Now, Thursday night, November 3rd, you would have gone to work?
Yes.
You would have left for work about 9:30
Yes.
to be there a little bit before your 10 o'clock shift.
Yes.
Friday nights, you don't have to work?
No.
That is, for you, the work weekends at 6 o'clock on Friday morning, right? But it starts up again at 10 o'clock on Sunday nights.
Yes.
Actually, Friday night and Saturday night are it's your weekend.
Yes.
So Friday night, 6:30 or 7, Mike's over and you don't have to go to work that night.
Yes.
But you have heard the night before, or not you, I guess, but the night before the news has been on the TV about Miss Holbeck disappearing.
Yes.
Let me just get that up on the screen so the jury can see the date on it. Boy, that's tough. It washes out. This isn't a picture you took.
No.
That's deer blood on the left
Yes.
side. We can't do it this way, but that's what I'm looking at. It's way over on the right side of this tag. It says date of insurance of the permit tag. Do you see that?
Yes.
And what is the date of insurance of the permit tag?
11/4/05.
Your Honour, maybe I will just, if I may, pass this around the jury in the old-fashioned way.
Any objection?
No.
Go ahead.
As you and Mike were putting these climbing sticking pads on your deer stand, your Uncle Stephen walked over to the garage.
Yes.
Came in. He and Mike had some conversation.
Yes.
You didn't catch the first part of the conversation, I gather.
Yes.
That is, I mean, you did not catch.
No, I didn't.
So you don't personally know whether Mike started the conversation or Steve did.
No, I don't.
What you caught was Steve making a joke about want to help me get rid of a body or dispose of a body, something like that.
Yes.
That was clear to you. It was a joke.
Yes.
Mike laughed.
Oh, yes.
You laughed.
Yes.
And Steve followed that up by saying something like, people go missing all the time. And this girl may have left for Mexico.
Yes.
Did you guys laugh about that too?
Yes.
Was this the first you learned that Teresa Holbeck was missing?
Yes.
But one or both of them, from a conversation, had seen it on TV.
Yes.
What the TV had said, well, I guess you hadn't seen the TV, but you eventually did see the TV reports
Oh, yes.
of Miss Holbeck missing, and it described her as missing,
Yes.
at least for the first several days.
Yes.
Now, you, I think, beginning on November 5, which is the day you tried to come home and found Jambo Creek Road blocked off?
Yes.
Saturday?
Yes.
Okay. Beginning that day, you were coming home to try to get your Labrador puppy back after goose hunting.
Yes.
In the morning,
Yes.
with Mike again, actually, right?
Yes.
Okay. So you come back and you can't get to your house because the police have the road blocked off.
Yes.
Beginning that right then and there for probably over 3 hours that Saturday, November 5th, you've talked to the police a number of times
Yes.
about the investigation into Teresa Holbeck's disappearance and death.
Yes.
It was a little over 3 hours, as you recall, that first day, Saturday, before you could get your dog back.
Yes. It was about 3.5 hours.
Okay. And then at least 2 other times you were interviewed in the weeks or days, weeks, months following Teresa Holbeck's disappearance.
Yes.
In any one of those conversations with the police, did any police officer ever ask you about this joke that you overheard between Mike and Steve in the garage?
No.
If we go back to Friday, November 4th, again, later in the night, do you remember either yourself or your Uncle Stephen getting a call, probably on a cell phone, from your Uncle Chuck?
No.
Something about having seen headlights back by his house?
Not that I remember.
And asking you guys to check it out?
Not that I remember.
You have no recollection at this point now of having driven down in the pit to see if you and Steve could find the source of these headlights Chuck was talking about?
Not that I remember.
Okay, but you stayed home that weekend. You did not go up to Crivet's?
Yes.
You were asked yesterday by Mr. Kratz about, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back to Monday, October 31st. I'm hopping around a little bit, but we're back to Monday, October 31st. You were asked whether you heard a telephone call come in from Teresa Holbeck at about 11:45 in the morning.
No.
That is, you were sleeping then.
Yes.
And you are a sound sleeper?
Yes.
The answering machine is in the living room,
Yes.
which is sort of next to and west of your bedroom,
Yes.
but it's not in your room.
No.
That answering machine is the kind that, I mean, you have heard calls come into the answering machine, I take it?
Yes.
Just not this one.
No.
When a call comes in and you don't answer it and it goes to the answering machine, this is the kind of answering machine where you hear the caller leaving the message.
Yes.
It's like a speakerphone. It broadcasts, so to speak.
Yes.
Okay. But even with that, you didn't hear Teresa Holback leave her message.
No.
You had, I think, said yesterday that on Halloween, you had no reason to be in your Uncle Stephen's garage.
Yeah.
That's true. Now, you had been in that garage on various times before.
Yes.
Been in there since?
Yes.
Typically, if you were going to go in Stephen's garage, it would be because he was asking for your help on fixing a car or a snowmobile or something.
Yes.
He would ask your help occasionally.
Yes.
Ask for Brendan's help occasionally.
Yes.
Ask for Blaine's help occasionally.
Yes.
Maybe Brian, your older brother, when he still lived there.
Yes.
When you got up that afternoon on Halloween and you happened to look out the window, you see the woman you now know as Teresa Holback.
Yes.
Your recollection is that she was wearing a black coat.
Yes.
It came down below her hips.
Yes.
That she was wearing trousers.
Yes.
They were black.
I do not know the color.
It's been a while since then, but one of the times you talked to the police, specifically a Calumet County investigator named John Diederin, was back in February 27 of 2006, coming up on a year ago.
Yeah.
Back then, when you were talking to investigator Diederin, the events of Halloween 2005 were a little fresher in your mind.
Yes.
Did you try to tell investigator Diederin the truth as best you recalled it when you talked with him?
Yes.
Not just on February 27th, but each time you talked with him.
Yes.
You knew it was important to give him accurate details if you could.
Yes.
You think reviewing his report might help refresh your recollection about what exactly Miss Holback was wearing that day you saw her?
Yes.
Just going to put an exhibit sticker on this so we know what we're talking about. I'm going to show you Exhibit 124, which is just Investigator Diedering's report. And I want you just to read this to yourself. You are welcome to look at all of it or any part of it if you want to. I thought that this paragraph on page 2 of the report might be the most helpful, but you look at whatever you want, just read it to yourself. All done?
Yes.
Okay. Does that help you remember today a little better what Miss Holback was wearing back on Halloween 2005?
Yes.
When you saw her, what was it? Black trousers you saw?
I honestly don't remember now
You don't. What did this help you remember?
that she was wearing black trousers.
Okay, that's at least what you told Investigator Diederin back when this was fresher in your mind.
Yes.
But you cannot recall what colour her top was.
No.
What you saw Miss Holback do as you were looking out the kitchen window you described, or the window near the kitchen, you saw her taking a photograph of or two of the van, right?
Yes.
And then you go hop in the shower.
Yes.
Very quick shower, you told us yesterday?
Yes.
3-4 minutes?
Yes.
Okay. And then the next time you can look out the window, presumably you have put some clothes on.
Yes.
So that takes a minute or two, or what?
Yes.
Do you look out the same window then again?
Yes.
And now you see her sort of walking towards your Uncle Stephen's trailer.
Yes.
Not too long after that, you leave the house with your bow to go hunting.
Yes.
Her SUV is still there,
Yes.
but you don't see her.
No.
And you don't see your Uncle Stephen at the moment.
No.
You are not looking for either one of them.
No.
You are just going out to get in your truck.
Yes.
Your truck is the other direction, so to speak. It's away from Stephen's house.
Yes.
So I guess tell the jury, did you hear a lot of horrible screaming when you came walking out with the Bowe?
No, I didn't hear anything.
Anybody crying for help?
Oh, no.
Was there any background noise that you remember that would have blocked out those sort of sounds?
Not that I can remember.
Did you, as you drove off, then to go deer hunting, it's what, 2:45 or 3, somewhere in that
Yes.
range?
Yes.
The deer, I guess, probably in general, aren't going up to be out of their beds and feeding, looking around for food in November until close to dusk.
Yes.
You were just driving 2 miles to your little hunting area
Yes.
by yourself.
Yes.
Is it that you like to get up in a stand, especially early,
Yes.
so you don't spook the deer or something?
Yes.
Okay. Even if you are going to have to wait a couple of hours for dusk.
Yes.
Anybody see you
Yes.
as you were going hunting? Who?
Scott Taddick.
Scott Sadek.
Yes.
Okay. Was he a friend of your mum's at that point?
Yes.
How do you know he saw you?
Because I passed him on the highway.
Okay. And what you told Investigator Diederin is that Mr. Taddick would be available to verify precisely what time he had seen you.
Yes.
Why did you think that?
Maybe he looked at his clock in his truck.
You hadn't had you talked with him about Mr. Taddick, about whether he could verify precisely when he saw you?
Oh, no.
You were just kind of hoping or guessing that maybe he could.
Yes.
What sort of, well, you were bow hunting that day. Do you also participate in the gun season for deer?
Yes.
What do you use the deer rifle?
30-06.
Is that yours?
Yes.
Do you have any other guns?
Yes.
What other long guns?
Shotguns, mostly all shotguns.
Mostly all shotguns. But back at the end of October 2005, you also had a .22 caliber rifle?
Yes.
Marlin?
Yes.
Semi-automatic?
Yes.
And then your mum had a bolt-action .22 rifle in her bedroom, right?
Yes.
You kept your Marlin .22 semi-automatic in your bedroom?
Yes.
Mr. Dassey, just to finish, are you quite sure now, whatever details you don't remember of Halloween 2005 today, are you quite sure now that you woke up and got up sometime by 2:30 or a little before?
Yes.
You said yesterday that Blaine and Brendan were still in high school. Got home usually, what, 3:40, 3:45, somewhere in there?
Yes.
And that was regular every day?
Yes, every day.
Because they took a school bus to and from school?
Yes.
School lets out at the same time, the bus runs the same route, that they were pretty regular?
Yes.
And are you quite sure that Blaine and Brendan coming home that Halloween 2005 were not the ones who found you still asleep and awakened you?
No.
And if Blaine told the police that you were still sleeping at 3:40 or 3:45 when he got home from the school bus, and that you awoke after he got home, Blaine is just mistaken.
Yes.
That's all I have.
Mr. Dassey, you stated today on cross-examination that you believe that you saw Teresa walking toward your Uncle Steve's trailer after your shower. Is that right?
Yes.
But you had seen her arrive before your shower?
Yes.
Did you see where Ms. Halbach parked her SUV?
Yes.
Where was that?
Just in front of the van on the north side of the driveway.
No obstruction to your view of that?
No.
Mr. Strang showed you a police report, an investigative report prepared by Investigator Diederin. Did you get a chance to look at that today?
Yes.
Have you had a chance to, excuse me, have you had a chance to look at that before today that you can recall?
Yes.
When I asked yesterday when the last time you saw a fire at Steve's burn area was...
Scope.
Do you recall what your answer was?
Scope.
Just a second. There's an objection that is beyond the scope of redirect. Is that correct?
Of course, yes, beyond the scope of cross, so it's not proper redirect.
It's what else he told Investigator Dietering. He showed him the very exhibit that I'm intending to refer to.
No, I don't think that's enough. It wasn't something that was dealt with on the cross, so I'm going to sustain the objection.
All right. You said that you saw Scott Toddock on the way to deer hunting. About what time was it that you saw him? Do you recall?
3:15.
About 2:45 p.m.?
Yes.
So you had already seen Teresa Havok by 2:45 and, in fact, had already left your residence. Is that right?
No, she was still there.
What I'm saying is you had already seen her
Oh, yes.
and had left your residence
Yes.
by 2:45.
Yes.
Mr. Strang asked if you heard any screaming or if you heard any other noises when you got into your truck. Were you listening for anything like that?
No.
How long does it take from exiting your trailer until you get into your truck? How far of a distance was that?
Maybe 10 feet. I had it parked right in front of the door.
How long would it take you to get into your car?
Maybe 10 seconds.
Oh, so in those 10 seconds, you didn't hear any screaming or any calls for help?
No.
Is that right? I think that's all, Judge. Thank you.
No recross, Your Honour.
Very well, Mr. Dassey, you are excused.
Your Honour, I will move Exhibit 123 or Exhibit 123. 124 was used only to refresh.
Any objection?
No.
Very well, the exhibit is admitted.
And we could probably have just a quick minute at sidebar.
All right, members of the jury, I'm going to excuse you for a couple of minutes. I don't believe this is going to turn into our morning break, so I will excuse you for a few minutes and we'll call you back as soon as we're ready to proceed. Again, as always, do not discuss the case during the break. You may be seated. Mr. Strang.
As I understand the narrow points of disagreement of the unreported sidebar, Mr. Kratz is under the belief that I had asked all the questions that on which we sought a stipulation on Michael Osmundson's testimony and that he left them go by without hearsay objection, so that there was no need for a stipulation. And I did not ask all the questions. There remains a couple of important points that I did not inquire about and that I want the stipulation on. I did ask one important one, and we could leave that off now. I agree there is no need for a cumulative stipulation on that. The points I did not go into because Mr. Dassey testified here on cross that he didn't hear the beginning of the conversation. And I think he said he doesn't, or agreed he didn't recall whether Michael started it or Steve started the conversation. So what I would need is Michael indicated he was aware of Stephen was one of the last people to see the missing girl and jokingly asked Stephen if Stephen had her, the missing girl, in a closet. That's the chunk of it, the start of the conversation that I didn't cover and could not cover with Brendan Dassey because...
Bobby Dassey.
Bobby Dassey, you meant?
I'm sorry, Bobby Dassey. Yes, because he did not hear it. I did cover the Mexico statement. Stephen stated that people go missing all the time and the girl may have left for Mexico. I think I did cover that. Mr. Kratz didn't object. We can omit that from the stipulation at this point. Again, I'm not looking to make it cumulative.
All right. I should note, before I hear from Mr. Kratz, that the purpose of the sidebar was counsel asking the court for an opportunity to bring this matter to the court's attention. Very short sidebar. I heard no argument from either party during the sidebar, but simply excused the jury so I could hear the argument at this time.
That's right. And again, the sidebar was at defence request.
Mr. Kratz.
Judge, I have no objection to the court reading those, which would now be those 3 sentences that were asked by stipulation, omitting the paragraph that starts with, according to Michael. And also, as Mr. Strang had alerted the court early this morning, the sentence that begins, Michael stated he had just learned, that sentence to be omitted. But the balance of that paragraph, beginning with, he stated he and Bobby, and ending with the phrase, missing girl, with the one sentence being omitted. If that's going to end this issue, Judge, I don't have any objection to agreeing that that be provided to the court. Make sure that the court has omitted or crossed out that one line Michael stated he had learned. But other than that, Judge, we'll agree to that stipulation.
I'm going to ask someone to read to me what it is you want presented to the jury, because I'm having trouble following this.
I will read it just as I would propose to read it to the jury. If he were called to testify, Michael Osmondson, the parties agree, would testify that he stated he and Bobby were inside the Dassey garage when Stephen came over. Michael indicated he was aware Stephen was one of the last people to see the missing girl and jokingly asked Stephen if Stephen had her, the missing girl, in a closet. At this point, Stephen asked Michael if Michael wanted to help bury the body, and they laughed about this together. He once again indicated, that is, Mr. Osmondson once again indicated, he thought Stephen might have been the last one to see the missing girl.
And that's what the state is agreeing?
That's just fine, Judge.
And, well, okay, Mr. Buting points out the next sentence. According to it's different than the testimony that I elicited from Mr. Dassey. I don't remember exactly the words now. I got into something about maybe she went to Mexico, as I recall, but...
Well, I'm not going to, from the bench, impose a stipulation on the parties.
Right.
If you folks have an agreement, and you wish to read something to the jury, and each of you agree to it, I will allow you to do that.
Counsel asked the question about she may have gone to Mexico. We do object to that. We don't object to the other part of the stipulation, once again, as I indicated, to put this matter to rest.
And Mr. Strang, you're going to present that to the jury as a stipulation? Mr. Kratz will agree on the record. I will let the jury know that it's a stipulation and they can take it as evidence.
Okay, no problem with in the last sentence there, for context, saying Mr. Osmondson once again instead of he once again.
That's fine.
Very well, all right. We'll bring the jurors back in. Mr. Kratz, I would like to take the morning break about 10:30. So if you are still in your direct...
I will stop.
Stop. You may be seated. Members of the jury, before we proceed to the next witness, the parties have a stipulation to put on the record. Mr. Strang.
Thank you, Your Honour. The parties, I think, have agreed that if he were called to testify, a man named Mike Osmondson would testify that he stated he and Bobby were inside the Dassey garage when Stephen came over. Michael indicated he was aware Stephen was one of the last people to see the missing girl and jokingly asked Stephen if Stephen had her, the missing girl, in a closet. At this point, Stephen asked Michael if Michael wanted to help bury the body, and they laughed about this together. Mr. Osmondson once again indicated he thought Stephen might have been the last one to see the missing girl.
Mr. Kratz, is that the state's understanding of the stipulation?
It is, Judge.
Very well. Members of the jury, based on the stipulation, you may accept that the facts read by Mr. Strang as evidence in this case. At this time, Mr. Kratz, you may call your next witness.
The state would call Brett Bowe.
Please raise your right hand. Please be seated. Please state your name and spell your last name for the record.
Brett James Bowe, B-O-W-E.
Mr. Bowe, how are you employed?
Patrol Lieutenant with Calumet County Sheriff's Department.
How long have you been so employed?
2 years.
And prior to that particular rank, can you tell the jury how you were previously employed?
I started with the sheriff's department as a jailer, became a patrolman, then a patrol lieutenant, patrol sergeant, and then eventually a lieutenant.
What are your duties currently as a lieutenant?
I supervise the patrol staff.
Now, sometime after November 5th of 2005, did you become involved in the investigation that brings us here to court today?
Yes, I did.
When did you first become involved in that investigation?
Sunday morning, the 6th.
And would you tell the jury how you first became involved?
I was contacted Saturday night and asked to come to the scene to assist with taking control of the command post.
What is a command post?
It's a central location in a crime scene that we utilize for staging and organizing the activities that we're going to carry out during the day.
Are there duties, or were there, I should say, the week of the 5th through the 12th? Were there duties in assuming responsibility for the command post that you performed?
Yes, they were.
And why don't we talk about, generally, those duties? We'll talk specifically in just a few minutes, but talk about, generally, what those duties include.
The primary duty was scheduling and making sure that there was security around the property during the evening hours and during the day. There were also numerous large-scale searches that went on at the property or around the property. And we were provided personnel to do that, and then we organized that.
The Avery salvage property itself, that 40-acre parcel, were you one of the officers responsible for securing that area? Again, between the 5th and 12th of November?
Yes, I was.
Describe for the jury, if you will, the security on the perimeter, that is, the 40 acres. We're going to talk a little bit outside of that in just a minute, but let's first talk about the 40-acre perimeter. Could you describe for the jury how that area was secured?
We stationed an officer at the four corners of the property. One of the corners was the command post, so there were always several people in that position. And then we had an officer in the remaining three corners with a squad car.
I'm showing you what's first been marked as exhibit number 79. Can you tell us what that is, please?
This is an overview photo of a majority of the 40 acres.
All right. I think we have a better way to show these today. I'm hoping, at least. Actually, officer, we're going to, because there's a couple of technical issues that we're going to do during the break, I'm just going to talk through this, and then after our morning break, we'll be able to look at some exhibits. You talked about the four corners, though, of the 40-acre property, and that you had people posted there. During what period of time were they posted? And was this a round-the-clock thing, or describe that for the jury?
Most of the time it was around the clock. During the day, when there were a large number of people in a certain area, we may utilize that security person to assist those people in the area because they really hadn't left that area anyway. At night, those people stayed in their positions through the entire night. And then if there was no activity in that area, they stayed in that position also.
We have talked about the 40-acre property. Then let's go beyond that. Can you describe the area that surrounds the Avery property?
To the north of the Avery property is State Highway 147. Running to the east of it, it would be Jumbo Creek Road. And to the west of it, it was County Q. The Avery property is south of 147, and there's a small dead-end road, Avery Road, that leads into the 40 acres.
Were you familiar that sometime after 10:30 in the morning on Saturday, the 5th of November, that law enforcement officers took control of the Avery property?
Yes, they did.
Was there a law enforcement presence or, excuse me, security perimeter set up outside of the 40 acres?
Yes, there was. There was an officer at the intersection of 147 and Q that when I arrived Sunday morning was in place. There was also an officer between that and Avery Road. There is a road that runs north of 147. There was an officer there keeping individuals from coming down onto 147. And then there was an officer at Jumbo Creek Road with the intersection of 147. There was also an officer at the end of the Avery Road that was checking people in and out of the property.
This responsibility for security, was that yours alone or was that shared?
The security on the property was shared with Lieutenant Sipple.
So the jury knows. Who is Lieutenant Sipple?
He would be the dispatch lieutenant for the Calumet Sheriff's Department.
Works for Calumet
Yes,
County. At that scene, Lieutenant Bowe, who did you take direction from?
I took direction from Sheriff Pagel and Investigator Wiegert and Agent Fassbender.
And Investigator Wiegert and Special Agent Fassbender. What was their role, if you know, at the scene?
I believe they were lead investigators.
I know you talked about security or the perimeter security. Were you also involved of security within the 40 acres? I mean, not just the four corners, but also other security issues?
Generally, no. If there was something specific, I would make arrangements to get people for them, but then they would place them where they needed them.
You may not know this, Lieutenant Bowe, but how many law enforcement officers were involved in this search effort? Do you know?
Total?
Yes.
I don't know.
All right. Other than security, your other responsibility, you talked about coordinating some of the searches. Is that right?
Correct.
Which areas of search responsibility did you have?
Anytime there was a large-scale search, we coordinated that. There were 2 large-scale searches inside the salvage yard, and there were 2 large-scale searches outside the property. There was also the Winnebago dive team was on the scene, so we coordinated that.
Let's take them in reverse order. Talking about the dive team. What was the dive team asked to do?
The dive team was called it on Sunday, the 6th, and Monday, the 7th. They were asked to dive any of the surrounding body of water. There were several gravel pits or stone quarries around this property, and there was water collected in those. So they were asked to come in and search those areas.
Do you know what they were searching for?
Evidence, anything, a body, any property that may have belonged to Miss Hallbach.
All right. And what kind of, you talk about the surrounding property. What kind of acreage or area are we talking about?
Inside the roadways that we were talking about, there's always 500 acres, and we did search outside that to some extent too.
Were all 500 acres searched?
There were probably portions of it that were not searched. There were some wooded areas that were searched with dogs, but didn't get the massive search that we did in some other areas.
Other than the heavily wooded areas, would you say the other or the balance of the 500 acres was searched
Yes,
by law enforcement?
yes, it was.
The coordination of these large-scale efforts, like the dive team that you mentioned, you directly speak with? Would it be the searchers, or was there an intermediary usually?
What we would do is we would put a representative from the sheriff's department, one of our deputies with each group. we would break them down into 10-man groups.
Let me stop you there. When you say our deputies, who are you talking about?
Calumet Sheriff's Department.
Go ahead.
We would communicate with our deputies which area we wanted to search, if we were looking for anything in particular. And they would relay that to the individuals that were in their group. They would notify us when they were going out, when they were searching, and when they completed their search. So we communicated directly with the Calumet officer that was with the team.
You talked about the dive team. Let's talk about the search areas outside of the 40 acres. I'm excluding the Avery property itself. And can you describe those large-scale searches for us, please?
A majority of that was either open field or quarries. What we would do is we would take a section of it and we would send our teams out to search that area. They would let us know when they were completed, and then we would determine which additional area to send them to. The dive team searched 4 ponds directly around the Avery property on Sunday. And then on Monday, they moved onto another quarry that was south of Jumbo Creek Road, and they searched for 2 large ponds there.
Were the ponds left intact, or were the ponds disturbed at all due to the searching?
The ponds that the dive team searched were left intact.
Were there other ponds that were examined?
There were.
Tell us about that, please.
There were 5 silt ponds that were located at Redan's main headquarters for their quarry. They utilized those for washing rock. The water would run into one pond, and it would kind of go from pond to pond until it got to the last one, and most of the dirt would be gone, and they would pump it out and use it again. The dive team determined that they couldn't dive those because there was too much sludge in them for the dirt they had washed off. So Redan agreed to dig 2 of those ponds out while we watched them do it.
All right. I think I may have interrupted you about the other outlying property searches. You said that they were open field searches. Then you mentioned the dive team, and I think that's where I interrupted you. What other kind of searches were there in the outlying areas?
Included in the open field, there were also quarries. There's quarries all over in that area. So our teams would go from an open field, and then they would have to work their way into a quarry, and they would search the quarry. Probably half of them were inactive at the time, or even more. So they would cover that area.
How many officers were involved in those large-scale searches, if you know?
It varied by day. One day we had 60 troopers that were involved. On Sunday, when we did the initial exterior search, we had 30 officers accompanied by 60 firemen.
All right. So anywhere between 60 and 90 people searching at a time. Is that right?
Correct.
And again, for how many days did these searches occur?
On 2 separate days, we searched the exterior of the property, and on 2 days, we searched the interior of the property.
All right.
So 4 days total.
When we come back from the break, we'll talk about the interior of the property. But is there anything that we have left out on the exterior? Any searches that you haven't described on the exterior of the Avery property?
Other than the searching with the dogs, on the first 3 days that I was involved, we had dogs on scene. So we would couple those up with Calumet officers, and we would send them to different areas around the property and just have them run their dogs through that property. The majority of what they ran through, we searched by hand again later.
Were those the
Search and rescue dogs?
Searching for evidence or searching for body or both?
Searching for body.
This might be a good time then for our morning break. Thank you.
All right. Members of the jury, we'll take our morning break at this time. We'll resume in 15 minutes. Again, do not discuss the case during the break. Counsel, we'll resume then at 10:45.
Thank you.
Mr. Kratz, you may continue your direct examination.
Thank you. Lieutenant, in front of you is exhibit number 79. Could you tell us what that is, please?
This is an overhead photo of a partial view of the Avery property.
And you recognize that aerial photograph?
Yes, I do.
And as I mentioned, I think this will work better today. I'm hopeful anyway. The jury is now seeing exhibit number 79. Is that correct?
Correct.
And will this photograph help you explain some of the interior or at least large-scale searches from within that property?
Yes, it will.
All right. How were search teams assembled?
As I said, their personnel would be provided to me, be it state troopers or deputies or firemen. We would then break them down into groups of about 10 individuals, and we would have a leader for that group who would normally be a deputy from a Calumet Sheriff's Department. We would coordinate everything through that officer, and then he would give the people under him the information that they needed, and they would report to him anything that they found.
I know that you mentioned law enforcement and some others, but what other type of individual were utilized in these search efforts?
Volunteer firemen.
Referring then to exhibit number 79, describe, if you will, the first large-scale search operation.
The first large-scale search operation was in the salvage yard. It was on a Sunday afternoon. We utilized approximately 50 firemen. Along with at least a dozen officers, broke them into groups. There were approximately 4,000 salvaged vehicles on the property. We had the firemen go through the salvaged vehicles, opening the trunks and hoods of every vehicle.
That first search was when? I'm sorry.
That was Sunday.
The 6th?
Yes.
What were you looking for?
We were looking for a body.
Referring again to exhibit number 79, could you show us the cars that you're talking about?
Everything down in this area up through here around. It actually extends a little further back to this side, but these are all salvage vehicles. There's a couple up in this area here.
Were you present during that large-scale search?
Yes, I was.
And what was required to look in these vehicles?
As far as what? To open them?
Yes.
The firemen used crowbars, or they used their hooligan tools that they had with them. And they would open the trunks and the hoods just to verify that there wasn't a body inside the vehicle.
On the 6th of November, was every vehicle searched? That is, all 4,000 vehicles?
Yes, they were.
Was some method that you or somebody else developed for how you knew a vehicle was searched or not?
The individual groups had crime scene tape or had caution tape. They would either mark the individual vehicles as they searched them, or as you can see, the vehicles are in fairly big groups. One group would start on the end. They would work their way to the other end, and then they would mark the two ends with caution tape so that everybody would know that that group of vehicles had been searched.
All right. What was the next large-scale search that you were involved in coordinating?
On the property?
Yes.
The next large-scale search was on Tuesday. It involved 60 state troopers and approximately 35 volunteer firemen. They went through all of the vehicles again. This time, they were doing a thorough search of the entire vehicle.
This is a different kind of search than on the 6th?
Yes, it was.
What was the scope of the search?
This search, they were looking for particular items. They were looking for the license plates from Teresa Halbach's vehicle. They were looking for a tool. She had a toolkit in her vehicle and there was a tool missing from it. They were looking for that. And then they were looking for any specific items that may have belonged to her or would be of evidentiary value. So they were doing a much more thorough search.
And again, are you aware that all 4,000 vehicles were searched?
Yes, they were.
Exhibit number 79 shows parts of the entryway. How is it that vehicles could travel from within or throughout the inside of the salvage yard? Do you understand that question?
You mean once they were in the yard?
Yeah. Talk about the roadways within the yard itself.
Okay. In between each group of vehicles, you can see there are all roadways through here. They kind of work their way through the property. It's just a dirt road that you can drive on. There's a gap between the vehicles. You can drive through it. That's what they use for their roads. So it's no formal road. The roads could change depending on where they put the vehicles, but it was an opening through the dirt that was used to drive on.
Are you familiar with the surrounding property, which is called Redon's Quarry?
Yes, I am.
Again, referring to Exhibit 79, if you could tell us where that is located.
Redand has, let's see, this is the north on this end. Redand has an active quarry from here down, which would be to the west. They also had a quarry on the south end, which would be in this area here.
From Redon's quarry, or from at least the access corner, the corner that would attach Redon's to Avery's, did you go to that corner, to that location? Did you physically stand in that location?
Yes, I did.
And are you able, and were you able, to see Mr. Avery's trailer and garage from that corner?
Yes, you can.
I'm going to show you what has been. Or have you looked at what's marked as Exhibit number 80? Tell us what that is.
This is a view of Mr. Avery's residence from the south.
Would that be near Redon's property line?
Yes, it's actually his property. His residence is right there. This view is from somewhere in this area, I would believe.
All right. Have the jury look at Exhibit number 80. Tell us what we're looking at here, please.
This is the back side of Mr. Avery's residence and his detached garage.
Now, I note that, and tell me if I'm correct or not. Is there a great difference between Mr. Avery's and Redon's property?
There's a berm between the two properties, and then on Redon's side, it goes straight down into the quarry. It's probably a 15 to 20 foot drop into the quarry.
All right. I'm just going to have you mark or describe these next exhibits. Some aerial photos. What is exhibit number 81?
This is a view, an aerial view of the Avery property from the northeast. It would be Avery Road coming into the northeast corner of the property.
We'll have the jury take a look at exhibit 81. Is that a picture of 81?
Yes.
With your laser pointer, can you describe the buildings that we're looking at? By the way, let me put in a foundational question. Did you become, in that 7 or 8 days, familiar with all of the buildings on this property?
Yes, I did.
All right. Looking at exhibit number 81, can you tell us, identify the buildings that are located therein?
Starting at the top, there's a fenced-in area in here. It's an impound area. There's a large shed in there that is an impound storage. I believe it's a metal shed. And then there's a smaller garage down in this area. It's also used for storage. This is a longer, narrow shed that was used for heavy equipment storage. Down in the trees here would be Alan and Dolores Avery's residence, and there's also a detached garage in there too. I believe it would be right there. This is an office area and a work area. We refer to it as the new office. And then there's another work area back in here that was referred to it as an old office area that was used.
Beginning your testimony, Lieutenant Bowe, you talked about a command post being established. Does exhibit number 81 show that area?
Yes, it does.
Could you describe that for the jury, please?
The command post that we utilized was in this area. That's where we organized our large-scale searches. We also had debriefing there. There was also a command post located up here that was used by the investigative team. So it was more of a work area for them.
Does exhibit number 81 also show an access road? That is, how you would get to the Avery property from Highway 147.
Yes, it does. This road right here is Avery Road. There's a paved road coming in that dead ends at the property.
And if you turn right on that road, where does that take you?
This is a gravel driveway that runs the length of the property, and it would end at Stephen Avery's residence.
Lieutenant Bowe, are you familiar with the corner of the property that not only has a pond, but from which Teresa Habach's vehicle was found?
Yes, I am.
Have you look at exhibit number 82, please, and tell us what that is, please.
This is an aerial view from the east of the southeast corner of the property where the pond was and where Teresa Halbach's vehicle was found.
And does it accurately depict that corner?
Yes, it does.
I will have the jury then look at number 82. With your laser pointer, tell us what we're looking at, please.
This is Redan's quarry to the south. There's an open field to the east. The view is from the east. This is probably a little more than half of the property. This is a low area in the salvage yard where a lot of the runoff collects into a small pond. There's a berm up behind that, and Teresa Halbach's vehicle was found up in this area.
Does this exhibit also show the car crusher?
Yes, it does. It's down right here.
All right. Are you familiar with what would be the northwest corner of the property? That is, the area where Mr. Avery's residence was?
Yes, I am.
And could you look at exhibit number 83, please, and tell us what that is?
This is an aerial photo from the north, looking south onto the Avery property and the Redan's quarry that's directly west to it.
I will have the jury now look at exhibit number 83. Tell us what we're looking at.
Once again, this is one of Redan's quarries. This was an active quarry at the time. This is Stephen Avery's residence and garage. And this would be Barb Jonda's residence and garage. And we have got about half of the salvage yard included.
Does this photograph, that is, exhibit number 83, show a second entryway into the Avery property?
Yes, it does.
Could you describe that for the jury, please?
There's a gravel road that comes up through here that connects all the quarries and runs down to Redan's processing plant. There's a conveyor that runs along the middle of that road and then runs into Avery property. Where the Avery property and Redan's meet, there's a passageway to drive a vehicle through there.
You talked about security being maintained on 4 corners of the property. How many corners of the property in which security was maintained 24 hours does this exhibit show?
2.
And could you tell the jury, please, where law enforcement officers were stationed?
There was an officer stationed down in this area at the end of the road in front of Stephen Avery's residence. And there was also an officer stationed down in this area just before it splits to go into the two quarries, securing this corner.
I don't know if I asked you this well enough when you described the purpose, but why were you attempting to secure the four corners of the property?
One, we had taken custody of the property. We wanted to continue that through the entire time that we were there. We also wanted to assure that nobody else comes into the property.
The corner of the Avery property that includes Mr. Avery's residence. Is that depicted also in exhibit number 84, the next exhibit?
Yes, it is.
Can you describe what exhibit 84 is, please?
This is an aerial photo from the southeast showing the northwest corner of the Avery property, and then the outside properties from there.
I will have the jury look at exhibit 84, and if you would be so kind as to tell them what we're looking at.
This is the same quarry for a dant that we had looked at. This is an open field. This would be Stephen Avery's residence. This would be Barbionda's residence. And then we're seeing the beginning of the salvage yard.
At least as to the west and as to the northwest, does exhibit 84 show the surrounding or adjacent properties?
Yes, it does.
Now, there was something yesterday that we heard from Trooper Austin. It was called a deer camp. Does exhibit 84 show that?
Yes, it does. The deer camp is right in this area.
Just for the record, you are pointing to what would be to the almost uppermost and leftmost corner of the exhibit. Is that right?
Yes.
What did that consist of, and what are we looking at, if you can tell us?
That was a camp that Redans used. They own most of the land around this area, and they use that for deer hunting. It consisted of 3 mobile homes that they had set up for deer hunting or something of that nature.
Yeah, right. Lieutenant Bowe, you talked about the different berms or the different grade around Mr. Avery's property. When referring to exhibit number 84, could you describe that a little bit further, please?
The berm on the west, you just want me to refer to that?
If there's other differences in elevation that this wouldn't show, I would appreciate if you would explain that what surrounds Mr. Avery's.
There's a small berm that starts in this area, Mr. Avery's property. Most of the salvage yard is in what appears to be an old quarry. Mr. Avery's property and the rest of the residents were up on where the normal grade would have been. So there's a small berm between his property and Redan's quarry. The further you get to the south, the higher that berm gets between the two properties.
Lieutenant Bowe, from within the 40 acres itself, is there also a difference in grade?
Yes, there is.
Can you describe that for us, please?
As I said, where the residents and the buildings are, they appear to be on what was the original grade. As you go into the quarry, you have to go down hills into the quarry, and then you reach a bottom grade where it appears is where they hit the rock bed. So it all slopes down as you go south, and then it kind of levels out in the bottom. And then when you get to the south end of it, there's a large berm separating that property from the next quarry.
What's the next exhibit that you have in front of you? What number?
85.
Okay. Can you just tell us what that is, please?
This is an aerial photo from the south of the entire Avery property.
We're going to go through these rather quickly, but I'm going to show you now Exhibit 85. Does that show the entirety of the 40-acre Avery salvage property?
Yes, it does.
If you can just very briefly orient us, What are the four corners that we're talking about?
This is the north. This would be Stephen Avery's property to the northwest. This is where the command post was set up. This would be A1 and Dolores's residence. This is the southeast. This is where the small retention pond is and where the vehicle was found. And this would be the southwest. This is where the conveyor would exit the property.
Does exhibit number 85 allow you to show the jury all four locations where you had officers posted throughout the day?
Yes, it does.
And if you could just briefly point to those areas.
There will be one officer in this corner at the end of the road.
Let me just stop you there. Would that officer be with a squad?
Yes.
A marked squad?
Yes, most of the time, yes.
Go ahead.
There was an officer down in this area under the conveyor. There was an officer stationed in this area watching the top of the berm in this area up here. And then we had officers up here at the command post.
Now, other than those four corners, if you will, are there other access points? In other words, is there other ways in which an individual or a vehicle could enter this property?
The only way for a vehicle to enter the property would be through the conveyor belt down here or through the main driveway up on top. It splits. You can get through the buildings or you can come down this edge and come down to it. There's a fence that runs along here and it's pretty steep grade through here. So you couldn't access it with a vehicle. There's also berms that run down this side and then around the bottom and then up this side.
To the west of Stephen Avery's, it does show a body of water. Do you see that on this exhibit?
Yes, I do.
And can you point to that, please? What is that?
It's a low spot in the quarry where the water gathers.
Okay. This is a good segue to talk about the weather that week. Do you recall the weather the week beginning the 5th of November?
I wasn't there on the 5th of November. I was informed it rained through most of the evening. When I got there on Sunday the 6th, it was cold and windy during the morning. We had a snow shower that came in through the morning, which is one reason why we didn't start opening the vehicles until the afternoon. Through the rest of the day or through the rest of the week, it was normally cloudy and cold.
The roadways from within the Avery property, when you got there on the 6th, would you describe that condition for us, please?
In the salvage yard?
Yes.
They were very muddy. They were covered in water. Some of them had as much as a foot of water on them. So we had to be very careful where we drove inside the salvage yard. For the first few days, we didn't make squads down in there. We would use four-wheel drive vehicles if we had to go in there or walk through it.
I think there's only 3 exhibits left. Why don't you tell us, what's the next exhibit you have?
86.
What does that show?
The aerial photo of the entire property from the north.
So what would be the exact opposite of 85? Is that right?
Correct.
Opposite end?
Correct.
Now, I'm going to show exhibit number 86. Virtually the same view as 85, just from the north instead of the south. Is that right?
Correct.
You had mentioned that there were some searches on areas that surrounded the Avery property, including some gravel pits. Exhibit 87 and 88. Are those related to any of those searches?
These are photos that would have been taken inside of one of the gravel pits.
All right. Do you know, by looking at 87 and 88, which pit, or is that too difficult to testify to?
Yeah, I wouldn't be sure.
All right. Are you able to identify exhibit 87 and 88 or not?
No.
All right. We'll save those for another witness. What was your schedule? In other words, how often were you there, and were you ever relieved? And did you ever go home from that location?
I arrived Sunday morning, approximately at 7:30. Lieutenant Sipple had been there since Saturday. I stayed through Sunday, stayed Sunday night. Lieutenant Sipple went home Sunday night and came back Sunday morning. I stayed until Monday afternoon, actually Monday evening. I think I left around 7:30 at night. And then I returned the following morning again about 7 o'clock. So we were both there during the day, and then we took turns being there at night.
So, how many hours straight would you be there? And then how many hours would you be off?
Generally, between 30 and 36 hours, we would be there. And then we would be off the property roughly 12 hours.
All right. How long did that last again for?
I left Friday night and didn't return to the property. Lieutenant Sipple had returned Friday morning, and then I believe he was the last one off the property Saturday when they left.
The 12?
Yes,
Referring to Exhibit 86, which is the last exhibit and the one that's shown the buildings, both the residences and the outbuildings. Who was responsible for coordinating the searches of those?
that was coordinated by Investigator Wiegert and Agent Fassbender.
Okay, so the cars and the property itself was your responsibility. Is that right?
Correct.
The buildings, that is, the interior searches, was the lead investigators. Is that right?
Correct.
Did you participate in any of those interior searches? Or was your responsibilities limited to exterior or vehicle searches?
The only participation I would have had with the interior searches is if Investigator Wiegert or Agent Fassbender required one of the teams from inside one of the buildings to move somewhere else. I may advise them of what that or send somebody to assist them in moving, but that was my only involvement.
All right. Finally, Lieutenant Bowe, I'm going to direct your attention to March 1st and 2nd of 2006. Did you return to the property on those 2 days?
Yes, I did.
And what were your responsibilities on March 1st and 2nd?
On the 1st and 2nd, they executed a search warrant for Mr. Avery's residence and his detached garage. I was keeping track of the individuals entering and exiting Mr. Avery's residence.
Is there a term for that?
I was logging them in and out.
Okay. You weren't involved, however, in any active searching?
No, I was not.
All right. I would move admission of Exhibits 79 through 86 at this time, Judge.
I don't have any objection.
Very well. Those exhibits are admitted.
I'm sorry, that's all I have of this witness.
Mr. Strang?
I would like to start with Exhibit 85, if we could. Good morning, Lieutenant.
Good morning.
I have got Exhibit 85 up on the screen for I'll pick this one only because at least north is to the top, which is where we're used to looking on the maps. And you told us where the security points, the 24-hour security points, that's my term, not yours.
Yes.
But you know the 4 corners.
4 corners, yes.
That you described. Before I get to those for just a moment, you were logging people in and out of this whole 40-acre area from November 6th for you through the 11th or the 12th as well, weren't you?
Yes. Are you referring to the entrance?
Well, that's where I'm going to go. And when I say you logging, I don't mean you personally necessarily, but that was one of the tasks you were overseeing.
I did not oversee that, but there was an individual logging people in and out of the property.
Okay. And where was that done?
Primarily, that was done where Avery Road met 147. There was a squad car parked right on Avery Road at the entrance.
Okay. So although Avery Road, which runs north to 147, and 147 was roughly east-west at that point,
Yes,
although Avery Road is paved, it really only goes one place.
correct.
Dead ends at a cul-de-sac just outside the business entrance.
Yeah, the pavement just ends right about in this area. And then everything else is gravel driveways from there.
So when you, for example, would come for one of these 30 to 36 hour shifts, you would get checked in or logged in up north of this photo where you turn off 147
yes,
to come down Avery Road.
yes, I would.
The logging in would involve somebody visually identifying you and either you writing your name on a log sheet or the officer with the log sheet writing your name down.
Correct.
Now, once you become familiar to the officers keeping the log, that's pretty quick in terms of identifying you.
We still had to identify who we were. The officers weren't familiar with all of us, so
And it was a rotating group of officers who were
yes,
doing the logging.
yes, it was.
Okay. And you weren't necessarily coming in uniform as you are today?
I always wore my work jacket, so I had my patches and my badge.
Okay. But even there, yes, we can see you are from the Calumet County Sheriff's Department, but we want your name.
Right, right.
The purpose for, well, first of all, when you are familiar with that sort of logging operation?
Yes, I am.
In fact, you did it on March 1st and 2nd,
Yes,
and the smaller area of Mr. Avery's house.
yes, I did.
When you are logging people in and out, the purpose is to log everyone in and out, correct?
Yes, it is.
I'm sorry?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Now, and in general, if there's an ongoing search or law enforcement effort, in general, the idea would be to keep the public out. That's one idea, right?
That's one aspect of it, yes.
And in general, another aspect would be to know which law enforcement officers are in.
Right. The primary purpose is to keep track of who came onto the property.
Now, this isn't to say that some members of the public might not be allowed in. I mean, someone who had a trade purpose or someone who needed to pick up medication, if there was some particular good reason for a member of the public to come in, somebody at that perimeter login point either can make the decision or could radio back and decide whether to let someone in for a particular purpose or not.
Yes, they could.
Law enforcement officers, it's not so much that you are trying to keep them out, but you want to know who's in and who's leaving.
Correct.
Just to keep track of bodies and personnel and some control over the scene.
Correct.
Was that during a week in November, roughly a week in November, when you were out there Sunday through Friday? Was the log check in point you have described the only place that people were being logged in and out?
Yes, it was.
Now, let's go, as I said, to the 4 security points. Do you still have the laser?
Yes, I do.
Okay. The one at the northwest corner, 24 hours a day, somebody, and I assume they changed shifts, but someone would be in the squad car sitting up there?
Yes, they would be in the area.
Either in their squad car or wandering around?
Around on foot, yes.
Somewhere close. All right. And the squad car, I don't know if you ever went over there to see this personally, but the squad car presumably would be parked near the end of that gravel road?
Yes.
Within yards, really, of the one burn barrel that stands, east and a little bit north of Stephen Avery's trailer.
Are you talking the one on the other side of the driveway?
Yeah, we have seen the burn barrel. That's, I don't know how to describe it other than east and a little bit north.
Up in this area?
Yeah, somewhere up in that area.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. That's the general area where that perimeter guard would be posted?
Correct.
And then you did the other 4 corners. These folks would get out of their cars from time to time and walk the perimeter a little bit.
They would get out of their vehicles. They would stretch their legs, walk around their car, yeah.
And overnight, 11 at night until 7 in the morning, in general, less active searching was going on.
Generally, when it got dark, we didn't search.
So other than folks at the command post and these perimeter guards, many of the law enforcement personnel on the scene would go home or go somewhere?
Correct.
And come back the next day with daylight?
Yes.
So I understand you don't know how many or what the total number of law enforcement officers involved were, but the numbers sound to me like dozens and dozens.
During the day?
Yes, during the day, I'm sorry.
Depending on which day it was, yeah.
Could have been something close to 100, a little above, a little below?
I think 100 would be probably the max.
At peak?
At one day, yeah.
In any event, though, at night, after dark, we would drop down to the 4 perimeter guards and then maybe a handful of people at one or both command posts.
Correct.
Now, if I understand you, on the search assignment responsibility was sort of a kind of a simple division. You and Lieutenant Sipple were responsible for assignments on open area searches and car or vehicle searches in the salvage yard?
Yes, we were.
And then Investigator Wiegert and Special Agent Fassbender were in charge of assignments for searches within buildings, so to speak, on the Avery property?
Yes.
There were plenty of tasks available for people in either your area of responsibility or the area of responsibility covered by Mr. Wiegert and Mr. Fassbender.
I'm not sure what you're asking.
Well, I mean, there were a number of officers involved in searching inside buildings and then a number of people involved searching the open areas.
Yes, they were.
Okay, now at this scene, I think we know this, but you know this scene is in Manitowoc County, not Calumet County.
Yes, it is.
So this was an atypical investigation for you.
Because of the location?
For a number of reasons, but specifically the location. I mean, you are out of county.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the roads.
Right. It's atypical in the sense that it's out of county for you.
Somewhat.
And you knew the reason for that in general was that a decision had been made the day before you got there to turn over investigative control to Sheriff Pagel, who runs your department.
Yes.
And then, of course, the department under him, the Calumet County Sheriff's Department.
Yes.
That your understanding was the decision was because there might be an appearance of a conflict of interest involving the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department?
Possibly. I was not in part of that discussion at all.
Okay, all right. But you were told that Sheriff Pagel was in charge?
Yes.
And then Investigator Wiegert?
Yes.
And of course, Mr. Fassbender is from the Division of Criminal Investigation, not either one of the Sheriff's Departments?
Correct.
Okay. You were aware of a lawsuit that Stephen Avery had pending against Manitowoc County at the time?
Yes, I was.
A federal lawsuit, was your understanding?
Just what I heard on the news. I really didn't keep track of it.
Sure. You had contact, though, with a number of Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department officers during the 6 days that you were there?
Yes, I did.
And officers from all kinds of departments in the area, right?
Correct.
Two Rivers Police Department, Michicot Fire Department, all kinds of different departments assisted.
Yes.
Wisconsin State Patrol sent a large complement of troopers.
Yes.
So this was a collaborative effort of a large number of law enforcement officers from a variety of agencies.
Yes.
You were aware that some of the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department officers, in particular, had strong feelings about Mr. Avery and his lawsuit?
I'm not aware of that. Nobody voiced that to me.
You didn't discuss the lawsuit of Mr. Avery?
No.
One way or the other?
No.
You met, during your time there, someone of your rank, a lieutenant from the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department named James Link?
Yes, I did.
Had you known Lieutenant Link before,
No,
but met him sometime during that week?
sometime, yeah.
He was in and out, involved in this effort.
Yes,
You had also met Sergeant Andrew Colburn from the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department.
yes,
Again, he too had some role and was in and out at various times.
correct.
Neither one of those two gentlemen told you, as one of the assigning officers of open field and car searches, that they had been deposed, had their depositions taken in Mr. Avery's lawsuit, did they?
No,
And no one else told you that either?
no,
Did you meet a Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department detective named Dave or David Remiker?
yes,
He had some role too during the course of the 6 days.
yes,
An investigator from Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department named Dennis Jacobs?
yes,
Same thing, in and out,
yes,
with some role in this. Were at any time were Mr. Link, Mr. Colburn, Mr. Remiker, and Mr. Jacobs in your area of responsibility? That is, involved in open field or car searches.
no, they were not.
Is it fair to conclude then, if you know, that they were an investigator Wiegert and Special Agent Fassbender's area of search responsibility?
Yes, they were.
Had you been asked to give up a couple of your guys and take, let's say, Lincoln Colburn for open field and vehicle searches, you could have done that?
Yes, I could have.
I mean, to some extent, the bodies were interchangeable.
I was provided with a group of people and I put them in a place.
Right.
Yes,
And I guess it was a poorly phrased question, but you were aware that there were some very specialized, trained people from the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory in Madison who were among the people involved in the search efforts.
I was aware the crime lab was on scene. I'm not sure what their function was.
Okay, but you were aware that the crime lab has people with some specialized talents, whether that's fingerprints or
Correct,
trace evidence recovery, that kind of thing?
correct.
Okay. If you now go forward to March 1st and March 2nd, 2006,
Okay.
so we're not quite 4 months, but going on 4 months later, that's the next time, actually, that you were back to the Avery salvage property.
Yes,
And this is the time when, in connection with a search warrant, your role is to log people in and out of Mr. Avery's trailer, his home.
correct.
There was someone else logging people in and out of his garage right next door.
Correct.
So these positions, logging people, it's a fairly small area that you were responsible for.
Yes,
The idea being to be quite careful or meticulous about logging who comes and goes.
yes,
I mean, in other words, essentially, you would have a visual on the area that you are responsible for logging.
yes,
While you were there on March 1st and March 2nd, 2006, you were in a position to see and, I think, actually to log much of this. But you at least saw carpeting removed from the hallway in Stephen Avery's home.
I saw them carry carpeting out. Yes,
And you were back in the trailer yourself after the carpeting was removed?
yes, I was. I believe I helped them remove some stuff.
Okay. So what you know is that the hallway that runs back to the extra bedroom and the bathroom and the master bedroom to the south, that hallway there had all the carpeting removed and carried out by law enforcement.
I believe so. Yes,
You saw the carpet removed, similarly, from the entire master bedroom,
yes,
sort of wall-to-wall carpet that was just removed.
yes,
You saw the mattress removed from the master bedroom,
yes,
the box springs,
yes,
and the entire bed frame in pieces.
yes,
rails, headboard, footboard, that kind of thing?
Correct.
Pillows you saw taken?
They may have been. I believe they were bagged.
And then you were aware in your role of logging the trailer that actually the wood panelling in the master bedroom or Stephen's bedroom was pulled off the walls and taken out?
Yes, it was.
All of it from that bedroom?
I'm not sure if all of it was taken or not. I wasn't in there when they did that, but they took out several pieces, yes.
Okay. And I'm trying to remember if the inside of the closet was, and I don't either, but you saw a number of
I saw pieces
pieces
come out of the residence, yes.
of the panelling on the walls,
Yes.
right down to the septic trap being removed from below that residence.
I didn't see that come out, but I'm aware that they took that, yes.
You were not aware of what was going on in the garage?
No,
That was not your responsibility?
no. Other than what I could see from my vantage point, I didn't know what was happening in there.
Okay. Lieutenant Lenk and Sergeant Colburn were not in the residence on March 1st and March 2nd. Is that your best recollection?
I don't recall them being in there at all, no.
But do you recall them there and involved in the garage search?
I don't recall them. I would have to check the log.
Okay. Well, and one way or the other, you just don't recall now.
I don't recall. I'm familiar with them, but I don't know that I have really even talked to them that much.
Fair enough. That's all I have got. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. For the moment, I'm not going to mark these 5 pages that I'm showing you because I don't know whether you will recognise them or not. But I will ask you, what do you say?
I haven't seen them before. I believe they're going to be a login for March 1st and March 2nd for entering the property.
But you haven't seen them before?
I haven't seen these before, no.
None of it is your writing?
No.
Or the log sheets you kept for the house on March 1st and 2nd?
No. In fact, on here.
Very good. Was there a separate log point just to get on the property on March 1st and March 2nd?
Yes, there was.
So someone actually had to log in twice then, if he was involved
If you entered
in the search?
If you entered the garage or the residence, we would keep track of people entering and leaving those parts. But anybody who entered the property also logged in when they got there and when they left the property.
And that was out again at Highway 147 and Avery Road.
I believe that was down around Barb's residence.
Close to in because this was a smaller search area?
It was a smaller search area.
This page on its face says it was cut by a Gary Schultz of your department. And I'm curious, is that form the sort of log sheet that you were keeping on March 1st and 2nd?
This is the form that we used. These were actually created for our large-scale searches. The top has the group leader listed, and that's how we broke it down and kept track of them that way. We used these to log people in and out of the residence because we had them available.
Have you seen this page before?
I don't recall seeing this page before. This was kept by Officer Schultz.
You recognize the form, though?
Yes, I do.
Same type of form you used on March 1st and 2nd?
Yes, it is.
The form, then, is kept in the ordinary course of the business of the Calumet County Sheriff's Department?
This was something that was created on scene for our large-scale searches.
Right.
And when we came back, we had these left over, so we decided to use them because they were set up with an in and the out, and we could keep track of.
Sure. And then the person keeping track is simply recording observations he or she makes at about the time he or she is observing who is coming and going.
Yes.
And then you folks kept these in the regular course of the business of the sheriff's department.
Yes.
Okay. So now that we have Exhibit 125.
Judge, could I inquire of counsel whether he intends to ask any specific information on that form? If he does, then I do need to be heard. If he is just showing the form, the kind of form, I don't have any objection.
I have no objection to go into the sidebar for a moment.
All right.
If Mr. Kratz wishes. So we have the first page that you looked at, and then Mr. Butin was kind enough to gather up the rest of the pages of that. So I think we have got 5 pages now.
What was the exhibit number, Mr. Strang?
It's 125.
Thank you.
Is this the first page been marked as 125?
But I'm going to staple it so we have a complete exhibit. Okay, and so there is no mystery. Pages 2 through 5 are just like page 1. I mean, it's the same form, running log, and page 5 where it ends is a partial page.
Correct.
Okay. This isn't something that you recall ever seeing before, this specific document, or is it?
Not this first page, no.
The other pages, do you, or?
There's one page, page number 3, where I have initialed off on it. That would have been a lunch break. Officer Schultz and I, we had a pickup truck parked between the residence and the garage.
Mm-hmm.
We stayed in the truck and we watched our prospective posts.
Okay.
Then we took a lunch break. Everybody was cleared out. He took his lunch break. I took over the log and just verified that nobody entered, and then I initialed off that everybody was out of the garage.
You had reason to know that Gary Schultz was doing the same job for the garage that you were doing for the trailer?
Correct.
Log
Yes.
people
Yes.
into the garage.
Yes.
And again, in general, I mean, this is a form you recognise, and you yourself used the same form on the same days, but for the trailer rather than the garage.
Correct.
Okay, I will move the exhibit, admissions of Exhibit 125. I will just staple the 5 pages together so it's complete.
All right, Mr. Kratz, do I understand the state wishes to be heard?
Yes, Judge, but that can be after examination of this witness.
All right, the court will reserve ruling at this time on the request for admission.
And that is all I have.
Mr. Kratz, anything on redirect?
Just 2 questions. Lieutenant Bowe, Mr. Strang asked you at night if it was dark in the salvage area. Is that completely accurate?
No, it is not. Through most of the time, we had a light set up in the southeast corner of the salvage yard. They would be set up down in this area where her vehicle was found.
Her being Ms. Habach's?
Yes.
What kind of lights are we talking about?
We're talking floodlights that were run off of a generator.
So that quadrant, the southeast quadrant, would be lit up even during nighttime hours, is that true?
Yes, it was.
And the final area of inquiry I have, Lieutenant Bowe, is the search responsibilities in your unit. That is, open fields and vehicle searches. Did that include citizen searches?
There was one group of citizen searchers that requested to assist. We allowed them to search the open field north of the residence. They actually started from 147, worked their way down. They were told to stay out of the line fence along the edge of the property, and they were watched to make sure that they didn't go near that. And they worked back and worked their way back up to the highway.
They never entered the 40-acre perimeter?
Correct. I believe they had 2 representatives that came into the property and spoke with the investigators and myself. And that was the only involvement they had inside the property.
Now, within the 40-acre perimeter, individuals who may have been involved in searching vehicles, did those include non-sworn law enforcement officers?
Yes, they did.
And did those individuals then have any specialized training, to your knowledge, in either evidence collection or evidence processing?
No, they did not.
Now, conversely, the officers who searched the interior, that is, those that Mr. Fassbender and Mr. Wiegert had responsibility for, was it your understanding that those officers required a higher level of expertise?
The individuals that they were utilizing were evidence techs, which means that they have been specifically trained to preserve and gather evidence.
All right. Obviously, a different kind of expertise than a volunteer firefighter. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
That's all I have for this witness, Judge. Thank you.
Mr. Strang.
Thank you. When we were talking about dark out before, we meant the sun going down.
Mm-hmm.
Correct? Teresa Holbach's Toyota already had been removed from the scene before you came on Sunday morning, November 6th.
Correct.
But if I understood you, nevertheless, you kept generators and some bright lights down in that southeast corner of the property anyway?
Yes.
The rest of the property was not similarly illuminated at night?
My understanding was they had initially set the lights up where her vehicle was.
Mm-hmm.
Once her vehicle was removed, they kept the lights running at night. They would reposition them from night to night. Most of the time, they illuminated this corner. Sometimes they illuminated out in this area, but they would move them around.
Great, thanks.
All right. You are excused. Members of the jury, at this time we'll take a lunch break. Again, I will remind you not to discuss the case during the break, and we'll resume after lunch. You may be seated. Mr. Kratz. The state wishes to be heard on the defense request to admit Exhibit 125.
We do, Judge. Actually, Mr. Fallon has asked for an opportunity to discuss that. Again, in candor to the court, we believe eventually this exhibit is going to be received, just not through this particular witness. We may be withdrawing our rejection, but we would ask to be allowed to inform the court of that after the lunch break.
Oh, all right. We'll take our lunch break now and resume at 1 o'clock.
Thank you.
At this time, we're back on the record outside the presence of the jury. I will indicate for the record that before resuming this afternoon, I will meet with counsel in chambers concerning a request that had been made to the court from a juror for permission to ask a question. And it's the court's policy, at least in criminal cases, not to permit jurors to ask questions for a variety of reasons. I have prepared a statement to read to the jury when they return, and I provide a copy of that statement to the attorneys. And counsel, I just wish to confirm the record that the parties are in agreement with the statement the court proposes to read. Mr. Kratz?
Yes, Judge. Your Honor, the state has received the court's anticipated response, and we have no objection.
Mr. Strang?
We think it's a good response.
All right, at this time then we'll bring in the jurors. You may be seated. Members of the jury, before we begin with the first witness, I have a statement I wish to read to you. The court has received a request from a juror that the court ask an additional question of the last witness. The court appreciates the juror's interest and attentiveness in the case, but in criminal cases the court does not permit jurors to submit questions to witnesses for a variety of reasons. In our adversary system, it is the duty and responsibility of the attorneys for each side to ask the question. Sometimes a juror may ask a question about evidence which is inadmissible, and the court does not want the jury to speculate about why a question may not be allowed to be asked. Other times the jury may be anticipating evidence that will be introduced later. The parties have the right to control the order in which the evidence is received. To assist you in performing your important task, you are allowed to take written notes during the trial. At the end of the trial, each juror will receive a written copy of the court's final instructions. However, for the reasons that I have stated, among others, I must tell you that the jury will not be allowed to pose questions for witnesses in this case. You are to draw inference for or against either party because of that restriction. Mr. Kratz, you may call the state's next witness.
Thank you, Judge. State will call Pete O'Connor to the stand.
Please be seated. Please state your name and spell your last name for the record.
Peter O'Connor, O''Connor.
Good afternoon, sir. Could you tell us how you are employed, please?
I'm employed as a deputy with the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department in the Patrol Division.
And how long have you been so employed?
Just over 18 years.
And were you employed on that capacity on November 5th of 2005?
Yes, I was.
Deputy O'Connor, on November 5th, were you asked to respond to a call at the Avery salvage yard?
Yes, I was.
Can you tell us where that is located, please?
It will be off of Highway 147 and Avery Road. I believe it's in the town of Gibson in Manitowoc County.
Is that also in the state of Wisconsin?
Yes, it is.
Did you, in fact, respond to that scene?
Yes, I did.
And first of all, when did you get the call to go to that property?
It would have been approximately 10:50 a.m.
Did you proceed to that scene?
Yes, I did.
About what time did you get there?
I arrived at approximately 10:54.
At 10:54 a.m., then, could you tell the jury what you did and what, if anything, you saw?
At first, I took up a position on what would be the north side of Highway 147 and at the intersection of Avery Road. I was instructed by Detective Remiker to monitor the scene and see if anyone was attempting to leave the scene. A short time later, I did notice some vehicle driving down Avery Road onto Highway 147. I did advise Detective Remiker of this, at which point he instructed me to go onto Avery Road just off of 147 and put up a roadblock and detain anyone who was attempting to leave off of Avery Road.
Were you able to perform that duty?
Yes, I was.
About what time did you set up this roadblock?
Approximately 10:56 a.m.
So within the 2 minutes from when you arrived and when you set up the roadblock, had you observed any vehicles leaving or entering the Avery salvage property itself?
There were none that entered. I believe there were 2 that had left.
All right. At 10:56 then, could you tell the jury what you did?
I set up the roadblock on Avery Road, just off of the Highway 147. The primary duty at that time was to prevent anyone from leaving the property and prevent anyone other than law enforcement personnel from entering the property. During the time I was there, I did detain 6 vehicles in total.
6 vehicles entering or leaving?
They would have been leaving the property.
All right. And at that time, at least at that early stage, did you individually know what was happening? In other words, did you know what the purpose of the call was?
Not totally. Detective Remiker apparently had some information that there was an individual or individuals in the property and they had possibly found a vehicle belonging to Teresa Hallbuck.
All right. Deputy O'Connor, the road, Avery Road itself, can you describe that for the jury?
It's a small town road. I believe it's paved. It runs basically south off of Highway 147, runs back to the Avery property. It's a small 2-lane road. There's also some large LP gas tanks just off of Avery Road. I believe they use it as a filling station for trucks.
All right. Deputy O'Connor, to your knowledge, were you the first law enforcement officer of any county to arrive at that scene?
Yes, I was.
Did you observe any other law enforcement officers arrive at that location?
A short time later, probably within a couple of minutes of my arrival, Sergeant Orth of our department arrived, followed shortly thereafter, probably by a minute or two, by Lieutenant Hermann. And he was followed almost immediately by Detective Remaker.
All right. The location that you were stationed at, how far is that from the Avery salvage property itself? In other words, the 40-acre salvage yard, if you know.
I'm not real sure how far up the property comes to Highway 147. However, based upon where the office area would be and the residences, I'm going to just guess a quarter of a mile.
All right. You said Sergeant Orth would have been the second to arrive. Is that right?
Yes.
Would he have been the first officer to actually drive into the property itself?
Yes, he would have.
And you didn't do that?
No, I did not.
You stayed on the highway.
I stayed up at that position until I was relieved by Deputy Hess at approximately 2:02 p.m.
All right. You said after Sergeant Orth and Lieutenant Hermann and then Detective Remaker arrived, did you see any other law enforcement presence?
There was various people coming at various times. I recall yourself being there eventually. Investigator Wiegert, I believe his name is, with your department came by. Assistant District Attorney Griesbach from our district attorney's office arrived. So there was, I remember your sheriff from this county arriving, Deputy Inspector Greg Shatter.
All right. Let me just stop you there. The Calumet presence, that is, Calumet County Sheriff's investigative staff, do you know about how long after Detective Remaker got there that they arrived at that location?
No, but I wouldn't think it was very long, probably within half an hour or so.
All right. Lastly, Deputy O'Connor, other than that first late morning and into the afternoon of Saturday, the 5th of November, did you have any other involvement in either search efforts or any other law enforcement efforts at that location?
I was not involved in any search efforts. After I was relieved by Deputy Hess, I did go back to Manitowoc. I was instructed to pick up some supplies and bring them back. I arrived back on the scene at approximately 3:23 p.m. to drop off the items. I left approximately 20 minutes later.
Let me just stop you. What kind of supplies are we talking about?
I was instructed to take some ropes, bungee cords, and tent stakes out to the scene.
All right.
And then on November 10th, I was instructed to do basically the same thing I had done. I set up on Avery Road. This time, however, I was keeping a log of the personnel coming in and leaving the scene. I arrived there at approximately 7 a.m., leaving at approximately 5 p.m. that day.
Other than logging individuals coming in and going out, did you have any other involvement that day?
No, I did not.
That's all I have of Deputy O'Connor, Judge.
Mr. Strang.
Thank you. When you arrived on November 5th, you actually go no further than just off of Highway 147?
Correct.
And during your time there, you are not keeping any log of who's coming or going at that time?
No, I'm not.
Okay. You suggested that there may have been 2 vehicles that left before you started stopping people coming or going. Could that have been Are you referring maybe to 3 pickup trucks?
I recall one of them being a pickup truck. I don't recall what the other vehicle would have been.
This may help. Let's see if I can make a short tape play for you. We should hear it if things work right. And it's on a CD. I'm just going to suggest to you that it's a radio dispatch tape from November 5th. Let's see if I can make it go and see if that helps.
10858. Just received a call from Cal County. There's an individual on the property of 147. That may be out with that vehicle.
Let me just stop it right there. Do you recognize any of the voices we have?
The primary one sounds like it's Detective Ramaker, and 496 would have been Lieutenant Hermann.
What's 496?
That's our call numbers. When dispatch assigns a call, our numbers are given to the officer to respond.
Is this like a badge number?
Correct.
Okay. And are you reasonably familiar with who it is by the call number?
Pretty much.
So you heard Detective Remaker, who is 278, right?
Correct.
And I'm sorry, 496 was Lieutenant Hermann.
Correct.
There are 2 Hermans in your department, right?
Correct.
The lieutenant is Tod, if I'm remembering right.
He was lieutenant at the time. He's since been promoted to deputy inspector, but yes, that would be Tod.
And there's a Robert, who was the deputy inspector that is now the elected sheriff, is it?
At the time, he was the inspector, and now he is the elected sheriff.
Okay. And this is Tod, the lieutenant we're hearing.
Correct.
Okay.
Dispatch, copy. 405 278.
405 is you?
That's me.
147. Okay, get over there. Don't have a lot of details. Got a call. Calumet County is heading that way also.
Now, what are you getting there?
Well, 405 is me. And I was just saying where I was. I was not real far from the Avery property at the time. The other officer was Detective Ramaker, and he was just informing me that they didn't have a lot of information, but I should head that way.
Okay. You essentially answered my question, but let's just nail down. You recognise the tape?
Correct.
I mean, this comes back to you as events
Correct.
of about the time on November 5 you have described.
Yes.
Okay.
Here you get. I will set up by the entrance across the street. 10-4. 278. Can you give me a 21?
That's the dispatcher calling
Correct.
to Detective Remaker,
Yes.
asking for a 2-1, which is a location.
No, 21 is a telephone call.
Telephone call 1021.
1020 would be location. 1021 is a telephone call.
Okay.
278. Jack, I have a pickup truck coming out of there.
That's Remaker.
Why don't you go in and try and make contact? Unknown who she is. Female party. Possibly just a citizen who is out there. She received permission from the property owner to look around. We're not even sure who she is. I'm going to give her a call. I just got a cell phone number.
Okay. So you are the one who says there's a pickup truck coming out of there.
I remember saying that, yes.
And then Detective Remaker is saying, why don't you go in and try to make contact with the citizen?
Correct.
Is that, I mean, that's the gist of what we're hearing?
So this is a private party calling that's supposed to be back there. It might be. I didn't get a lot of information from Cal County. That's all they could give me. 10-4.
That's you.
405. Get in there to get more information. Looks like it might be a vehicle. I have 3 pickup trucks coming out of there.
That was you?
Saying the pickup truck is coming out, yes.
I got 3 pickup trucks coming out of there sometime, and this is Remica, right before that, telling you get in there,
Correct.
meaning go onto the property.
Correct.
But you didn't.
No, I did not.
Okay. And just tell us why that is.
I believe once I said those pickup trucks were leaving, I believe that he said that I should stop the traffic and identify.
Yeah. And actually, you're exactly right.
As of right now, walk off that road. Nobody goes in, nobody comes out. Get license plates coming into Michigan. 405 dispatch. I copy. Fort Lincoln 38152.
Now, that's exactly what I think we heard Remica say. As of right now, block off that road.
Correct.
Nobody goes in, nobody comes out, get license plates.
Correct.
And then the next thing we hear is you calling dispatch with a license plate.
Correct.
Okay. And it goes from there, and then within just a few minutes, is it Sergeant Orth and Detective Remica and Lieutenant Hermann all arrive?
Correct.
In something like that, Orth, Hermann, Remica, in that order?
Correct.
Okay. So we got our 1 pickup truck coming out of there earlier, and then you say there have been 3 pickup trucks coming out there sometime?
The one that I ran the plate on, I believe got out before I was able to get set up. So I just ran the plate as he went by me.
Okay.
There was other vehicles that I could see coming down Avery Road. Those I do believe I was successful in stopping.
And did there come a time shortly after this where one of the people you stopped, you found had something called a body-only warrant?
Correct.
What's a body-only warrant?
It's a put out by the court. Generally speaking, it's for if they don't show up to a court appearance or some sort of a matter. They will put out a body only, which means that they cannot bail themselves out. They have to go before the court to satisfy the warrant.
Right. So you have got an active open warrant for someone. You, as a sworn law enforcement officer, are allowed to take them into custody once you have them and you know there is a warrant for them.
Correct.
Okay. And that was somebody who was coming out?
Yes, it was.
Not a member of the Avery family?
No.
Just somebody who happened to be there?
Just somebody who happened to be there and coming out.
And in general, did these appear to be customers coming out that Saturday morning?
Yes.
The business was open?
I believe it was open until noon that day.
And so I'm not entirely clear. You think it's 4 pickup trucks that left before you started stopping the traffic, or is it a total of 3? Are you clear anymore?
I thought it was only 1 that actually got, I think it was 2 that got past me. I could not get the first one's license plate. The second one was the one that I called out, I believe. I believe anything else I was able to stop before they were able to get out, as best I can recall.
Maybe I misunderstood. I'm going to go back just a little bit.
As of right now, walk off that road. Nobody goes in, nobody goes out. Get license plate.
Going back a little more.
405. Get in there to get more information. Looks like it might be a vehicle. I have 3 pickup trucks coming out of there.
Am I hearing that right? That's you saying I have had 3 pickup trucks coming out of there sometime?
Sounds garbled to me on this end, so I can't tell what number I'm saying.
Okay. And in any event, though, first you are being told to get in there, and then now, immediately after this, you are being told, as of right now, block off that road.
Correct.
As of right now, block off that road. Nobody goes in, nobody goes out. Get license plates coming into Michigan.
And that's what you do.
Correct.
And I'm sorry, what was the second day when you were out there for 10 hours, 7 to 5, and did keep a log?
That would have been the 10th, I believe.
Your job that day was simply maintain a log.
Just maintaining a log, logging people coming in, logging people going out, and making sure nobody comes in who wasn't supposed to be in.
All right, very well. So that includes checking law enforcement officers' identification
Correct.
and certainly checking citizens and probably screening and keeping most of them out.
Correct.
That's all I have.
Just one moment, counsel.
Mr. Strang, the court reporter was just telling me she had trouble hearing everything that was coming through on the audio. Is that an exhibit, or is it going to become one?
Probably makes sense to make it an exhibit.
I think that would be good, because otherwise I'm not sure that the record will be accurate.
Why don't we call it 126?
Okay,
And it's on a CD with 4 tracks. I will dupe it overnight, burn a copy, and we can leave this one with the court.
very well. Is that acceptable to the state?
It is, in fact. We're about to do that with the photo, Judge. That's just fine.
Okay,
This photo, Deputy O'Connor, we're going to be calling Exhibit 127. We're going to be replacing the electronic version with the 4x6. But to help the jury understand what we're looking at, why don't you tell us what Exhibit 127 is?
Looks like an aerial photo of partially the Avery property. Looks like that would be Highway 147 there and Avery Road.
There's a laser pointer up right next to you there.
Okay.
If you can show us Highway 147 and what would be Avery Road.
I believe this would be Highway 147 here to diagonal, and then this would be the Avery Road coming in here.
But 147 will be at the top of that exhibit,
Correct.
and Avery Road goes from pretty much left to right toward the top of the exhibit. Is that correct?
Correct.
And that exhibit really shows the entirety of the Avery Road. That is, what would be a service road or the entrance to the Avery salvage property. Is that correct?
Correct.
In other words, as we look at this exhibit from left to right, that's the whole road?
Yes.
All right. And the furthest right point on that exhibit, that's where the business is, and in fact, some of the residences.
Correct.
Is that right? Now, could you just show the jury, just so they are oriented, where was it that you were stationed and where were you stopping the vehicles?
This area right here would be the propane tanks I was talking about.
All right.
So it would have just been of the Highway 147 side of those tanks, right in this area.
All right. So you're actually south of Highway 147 a ways, a couple 100 feet maybe?
That would be a fair estimate, yes.
Very good. That's all I have then. And Judge, when we get the hard copy of this, which may already be in the court file, but we will replace and have received Exhibit 127, I believe, as admission.
That works just fine. That works just fine.
all right, the exhibit is admitted.
I will just nail this down with one last question. So between 10:56 and when you leave at about 2 p.m. on November 5, there is no log of law enforcement people coming into or leaving the Avery property.
I did not start one. I don't know if one of the other officers that were down below started one or not.
Very well. Mr. O'Connor, you are excused.
My next witness, Judge.
Yes.
State would call Sergeant Orth to the stand.
Members of the jury, You can stand up and stretch a bit if you wish before the next witness comes in.
Please be seated. Please state your name and spell your last name for the record. Jason Orth. O-R-T-H.
Mr. Orth, could you tell us how you are employed, sir?
Patrol Sergeant with Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department.
How long have you worked for Manitowoc County?
Just under 10 years.
And were you employed in a law enforcement capacity before that?
No.
What are your duties with the department at this time?
As I mentioned, I'm a patrol sergeant for the patrol division.
General traffic and...
Traffic and criminal investigations.
All right. Sergeant Orth, I'm going to direct your attention to November 5th of 2005. Ask if you were employed with Manitowoc County at that time.
Yes, I was.
Were you roughly in the same capacity?
Correct.
On that date, in fact, sometime just before 11 a.m. in the morning, were you called to a property known as the Avery Salvage Yard?
Yeah, I was.
And did you proceed to that scene?
Yes, I did.
Do you recall about what time you arrived at the scene?
Approximately 10:59 hours, 10:59 a.m.
Tell the jury what you did when you got to that scene, please.
I proceeded down to the southernmost portion of the property, the southeastern portion of the property, where I was flagged down by two white females who were later identified as Pamela and Nicole Sturm.
As you testify, I'm going to show you an exhibit which has already been received as exhibit number 86. There's a laser pointer in front of you, and you should feel free to, if you believe it will assist your testimony or the jury's understanding, to use that laser pointer. First of all, exhibit 86. Does that look familiar to you? Are you oriented all right when you look at that?
That would be the residence on the lower left-hand corner trailer.
Yes, the business, the entrance, I believe it's uncontested, is in the lower left-hand corner. Avery Road would be towards us if you're looking from north to south.
Over here is where you're saying the main entrance is?
If you come towards us, down on the exhibit, Highway 147 would be off the screen to the bottom.
Okay, all right. Then I would have proceeded down the eastern side here, down to the lower area.
All right. Sergeant Orth, were you the first law enforcement officer, at least that you observed, that was on the Avery property itself?
Yes, I was.
Now, you are using the pointer, and you were showing, I think, the jury that you were traveling from what would be a generally northerly direction, south along what would be the east side or the left side of the property. Is that right?
Correct.
Can you show us the road that you traveled, please? All right. And again, the record should reflect that you showed us that service road or driveway on the easternmost edge of the property. Where was it that you stopped your vehicle?
I stopped the vehicle right where Pamela and Nicole Sturm were standing, which is in the southeastern portion of the property.
Do you recall any piece of equipment being close to that location?
There was a vehicle crusher in that general area.
Did you see these women when you got there?
Yeah, I observed them. Actually, they were attempting to get my attention. They were flagging me down.
Let me ask, Sergeant Orth, whether you were driving a marked or an unmarked patrol unit.
It was a fully marked patrol car.
Tell the jury what you saw when you arrived.
About that time, I saw Pamela and Nicole Sturm both physically upset as they were crying. They immediately directed my attention to the southernmost row of junked vehicles, and one of the two had indicated that the vehicle in question was approximately 10 vehicles in.
Now, when you say the southernmost road, can you tell us what you're talking about?
On the picture?
Yeah, if I zoom in a little bit here, tell me if that helps.
There we go. They were positioned right around this area, and they were directing my attention to this southernmost row of vehicles.
And the record should reflect that you are pointing to an area south of the pond, or what appears to be a body of water, which is also south of the crusher. Is that right?
Correct.
And maybe with this more zoomed in version of exhibit number 86, could you once again show us where you parked, and if you proceeded on foot, which way you walked?
I parked the squad car right in this general area near the crusher. I asked both Pamela and Nicole to remain at this location, and then I walked down this overgrown access road, which led to the southernmost row of vehicles.
Did you walk around the pond? That would be around the left of the pond.
Correct, the southeast side.
And again, Sergeant Orth, were there any other law enforcement officers at that location?
No, I was the only one at that time.
And were there citizens that were meeting with or speaking with either of the Sturm women at that time?
No.
Tell us where you walked and tell the jury what you saw.
I walked down this overgrown access road towards the vehicle in question, a green or blue RAV4. I observed that the vehicle did not have any registration plate on the rear, and as I was approaching, it had two branches covering the back of the vehicle. It had old wooden fence posts propped up against the passenger side rear tail light. It had an old vehicle hood resting up against the passenger side rear fender. It had a piece of plywood propped up against the front passenger side fender. It had at least one branch covering the roof and at least one branch covering the hood of the vehicle, so it was quite obvious somebody attempted to conceal it.
Was there anybody in that area or location when you got there?
No one was in that area at all.
Did you approach the vehicle?
I did approach the vehicle on the passenger side and immediately glanced in the front passenger side window looking for persons.
For what?
Looking for Teresa.
Was she in the vehicle?
Teresa was not in the vehicle. It appeared to be unoccupied.
Did you attempt to open any of the doors?
No, I did not.
Did you in any other way touch or disturb the vehicle?
No, I did not.
After looking in the vehicle and not finding a body, what did you do?
At that time, my next goal was to positively identify the vehicle. Therefore, I walked around the rear of the vehicle to the driver's side and attempted to read the VIN number. However, with it being overcast and shadows and so forth, I was unable to clearly read the VIN number.
And what did you do then?
At that time, I observed Detective Remaker and Lieutenant Hermann approaching the vehicle. Therefore, I met them several feet behind the vehicle.
Again, referring to exhibit number 86, could you direct the jury to approximately, first of all, approximately where the RAV4 was, and then where did you meet with Detective Remaker?
Okay, Detective Remaker and Lieutenant Hermann parked in the same general area of my squad car back by the crusher area. They walked the same exact path I did up and over, and the vehicle was in this general area.
All right.
And I met them approximately 7 feet behind the vehicle.
Upon Detective Remaker and Lieutenant Hermann's arrival, did you note whether either of those individuals touched, entered, or otherwise disturbed the vehicle?
No, they did not. Lieutenant Hermann remained approximately 7 feet behind the vehicle. Detective Remaker and I then reapproached the vehicle in attempts to positively ID it.
How?
Well, Detective Remaker walked up the passenger side. I believe he had a flashlight. He started viewing the VIN number. While he was viewing the VIN number, I looked in the back window once again to verify Teresa was not in the vehicle. While looking in the back window, I observed it turns out it was a photo memory card that had Teresa's name written on it. Moments later, Detective Remaker informed me the VIN number also matched.
After obtaining a positive identification for the vehicle, what did you do then?
I proceeded approximately 30 feet behind the vehicle and started providing security. Detective Remaker and Lieutenant Hermann immediately proceeded back to the staging area where we parked our squad cars to once again talk to Pamela and Nicole Sturm.
What do you mean by staging area?
The area where we were parking our vehicles and later in the investigation where other officers started parking when they arrived.
Could you show us again on the overview?
Which would be where I'm pointing is where I parked near the crusher, which is, I would say, at least 100 yards away from where the vehicle in question was located.
All right. Sergeant Orth, from your arrival, being the first officer that was there, would you have been in a constant position to determine whether any law enforcement officer or citizen entered or disturbed that vehicle?
Oh, yeah, I was. I had constant visual of the vehicle.
And I want you to tell the jury whether any police officer or any citizen entered or otherwise disturbed that RAV4.
No police officer or citizen approached or touched that RAV4.
And how long did you remain as the primary security officer for that vehicle in that location?
I would have to look in my report to see the time I ultimately left. However, I know I received my first break at about 1. Lieutenant Hermann proceeded up to my location approximately 30 feet behind the vehicle, at which time he focused on the vehicle. I went to the staging area where I took a short break. However, even at the staging area there was still a clear view of the vehicle, so even during my short breaks I was able to observe. No one approached.
Let's go back to that just a minute. You said there was a clear view of the vehicle from the staging area. Is that where Pam and Nicole Sturm were standing?
Correct.
When you stood in the exact location that Pam and Nicole Sturm were standing, could you see the RAV4 from that location?
Oh, yeah.
So if anybody disturbed or entered the vehicle, would you have been able to see that?
Yes.
You said that some other police officers and other law enforcement types arrived at the scene. Is that right?
Yeah.
All right. Who else came to the scene? Who else was there?
Deputy Cummings from the Manitowoc Sheriff's Department. Are you talking through the entire time I was there?
Yeah, I'm talking really about whether other departments, other agencies had arrived.
Calumet County Sheriff's Office had officers arriving.
About how long after your arrival before Calumet showed up?
An hour. That would be an estimated time.
I suspect there's logs or better information for that. Is that fair?
Yeah, correct.
Nevertheless, between the time that you arrived And when Calumet County got there, were there other Manitowoc County officials that were responsible for scene security, or was that your responsibility?
That would have been myself, Lieutenant Hermann, when he gave me a short break, and Deputy Cummings when he gave me a short break.
Again, these short breaks. Did you maintain visual connection with the vehicle at that time?
Yes. As I mentioned, I was over near the staging area where I could still see the avenues of approach for the vehicle. I just want to clarify there were some small trees in this area around the pond. However, due to the time of year, there was no foliage upon the trees. Therefore, you could still see through.
Okay, I'm going to come right out and ask you. Any time before Calumet County arrived, did you see a gentleman who works for your department named Lieutenant James Link?
I did not see him.
At any time before Calumet County arrived, did you see a gentleman who works for your department named Andrew Colburn?
No, I did not see him.
That's all I have of this witness, Judge.
Mr. Buting.
Thank you, Judge. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Sergeant, you said that when you would take your break, you would go directly to the location where Nicole and Pam Sturm were, right?
Correct.
And you said, and that was right next to the crusher, right?
Near the crusher.
Okay. Well, I don't know if you can see there. Maybe it's because this photo is kind of far away from you, but you have been pointing to this area around here, just very close to the pond, as the area where the crusher is, right?
Actually, I believe that crusher may be more to the left and down. That's a focal point for me to say we were near that area. However, when we parked the staging area,
I assume.
if that's the crusher, we were parked in front of the crusher closer to the pond area, but that's one
Do you want to walk
specific area.
up a little closer to see if this is the crusher down here at the very bottom of the picture?
If you would like me to, I could.
Well, I would like to clear this up. I want the jury to understand the distances and where exactly you were situated. And would you please tell us whether you were down here at the crusher or whether you were up there?
I was up here.
Closer to the pond, you were up here?
Right.
That's right, where you were standing right next to Pam and Nicole Sturm when you would take those breaks, right?
I'm not sure if they remained at that area. I'm referring to that area because that is where I met them. That is where I parked. And then when I would take a break, I would return to that area.
Well, sir, didn't you just say that you stood in the exact location where Pam and Nicole Sturm stood in and could see the vehicles from that spot, right?
I was in the same general area. I did not stand in the exact spot.
Oh, so you never stood in the exact spot where Pam and Nicole Sturm stood. Is that what you're telling us now?
That would be impossible if they were standing there to stand in the exact spot.
All right. Were you standing in almost the exact spot that Pam and Nicole Sturm? I believe your counsel said that the word exact spot, but you understand what we're talking about. I'm not saying you're standing on top of them, obviously.
I was standing in the same general area.
Okay. And by same general area, you consider, let me ask you this. If we heard testimony that the distance from the crusher to the vehicle, which was, we have heard testimony that the distance from the crusher to the vehicle is 379 feet. Would you disagree with that or agree with that?
That's probably accurate.
Okay. And so the distance from where the crusher is to about where you are saying you were, by my estimation, would be at least 100 feet, 75 maybe?
Possible.
So you consider standing 75 or 100 feet away from somebody to be in the same general area. Is that what your testimony is?
When we're talking this is such a big area here, I was considering this the same general area.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify how precise you are. Okay. Now, when you first walked up to the vehicle, you said that you approached on the passenger side, right?
Correct.
And you didn't have a flashlight with you.
No, I did not.
But you looked in which window to see if there was a body?
The front passenger side window.
Okay. And you saw none, right?
Correct.
And did you look around to see if there was any keys or anything like that in the vehicle?
No.
You weren't looking for anything but a body at that occasion. On that occasion, right?
Correct.
And then you walked around the rear over the driver's side,
Correct.
all the way up to where the VIN number would be.
Yes.
But you couldn't see any of them.
It wasn't clear.
Okay. So the question is, could you see any of the VIN numbers?
Yes.
Okay. Did you report that, call it in? I can see, VIN numbers, the first four or the last four or anything like that.
No, I did not, because as soon as I realized it was not clear and I could not read the entire VIN, at that time I already observed Detective Remacher and Lieutenant Hermann approaching.
Okay. And then they were on foot. Is that what you were saying? Or did you see them driving up?
I saw the last of them driving up, but what I'm referring to is they were literally walking down the path while I was trying to look at the VIN.
Well, did you see them when they were walking, or did you see them when they were driving?
Both.
Okay. So you watched them park, and then you watched them walk the whole way to where you were.
Not the entire time, but I observed them.
And did you park up here in this area that you have been circling, or did they park down here closer to the car crash, lower part of this photograph?
As we were the first responding officers, we were up here more, and the more officers that would arrive would end up being further to the north, which would be closer to the crusher.
Okay. And then Detective Remacher and a flashlight?
I believe so.
And you said that he walked over and was shining the flashlight. Was he on the driver's side when he was shining the flashlight in, or?
He would have been on the driver's side, by the front driver's side fender, looking at the VIN number.
And you were looking in the back window when you saw this photo memory card?
Correct.
What side of the car were you on at that point?
I was in the back of the vehicle. I don't recall if I was closer to the driver's side or the passenger side.
Well, what window did you look through?
The back window?
The very rear tailgate window?
Correct.
Okay. And you didn't have a flashlight?
No, I did not.
But you were able to see a photo memory card. About how big was it?
I don't recall. I recall the name Teresa sticking out.
Okay. But we're talking about an item, maybe 1.5 inches, 2 inches big, something like that.
Probably about that size, yes.
You're talking about these little square things that you stick in the small digital cameras, is that right?
I glanced in. I don't know exactly what type of item it was. However, I did clearly see her name.
I understand that. I'm getting to that. But I would like to make it clear just about the size of this object that you were looking at. Can you tell me?
No, I cannot.
I mean, you know what a floppy disk is, the old floppy disk that used to go in the computers?
Yes, I do.
It was smaller than that, right?
I believe so.
So it was one of the real small scan disks, or whatever they are, that you use in cameras, right?
In my report, I indicated that I observed a smaller piece of paper with Teresa's name on it. After reviewing Detective Ramaker's report, that is when I learned it was some type of digital camera card.
Okay. And on that little card, you were able to see her name, right?
I saw the name Teresa.
Okay. Did you look in any other windows?
No,
The entire time that you were there, guarding or standing over the vehicle or looking into it, you never saw any blood inside the vehicle, did you?
I was approximately 30 feet behind the vehicle. I could not see inside.
Sir, we have established that you looked in the passenger side window first, the front passenger side window when you first arrived, right?
Correct.
You didn't see any blood, right?
I glanced in for a body.
Did you see any blood, sir?
No, I did not.
Thank you. Then we know at least one other time you looked to the rear tailgate window, right?
Correct.
Are those the only 2 times you have ever looked inside the vehicle?
Correct.
Okay. And you didn't see blood on that occasion either, did you?
No, I did not.
But you were able to see something as small as a handwritten Teresa on a little computer desk, right?
Correct.
And if you had seen blood, of course, that would have been something you would have made a note of, wouldn't?
I would imagine if I saw blood, yes.
Okay. Did you ever see Lieutenant Lang that day?
No, I did not.
And you left at 2 o'clock.
Excuse me?
You said you left at 2 o'clock.
I would have to read my report.
Okay. You didn't actually keep a log of, or you didn't actually start preparing a log of anybody coming to and from that scene of the RAV until 2:45. Isn't that right?
No.
You did prepare a report, right?
Yes.
And you try and be truthful and complete and accurate when you make those reports.
Correct. As soon as I stood behind the vehicle, approximately 30 feet, I used a small notepad out of my shirt pocket. That was a rough log that I started. When I proceeded back to the staging area is where I prepared a final log, which is probably what you are referring to.
All right. If you would just read what you say for the entry that says 14:45 hours, that is 2:45. Is it not?
Correct. You want me to read this?
Sure, read the last sentence.
I started a log to document the names of individuals approaching the immediate area around the vehicle.
Okay, I started a log, right?
Correct.
Is there any place earlier in your report where you mentioned that you ever took any notes, anywhere else, about who was coming and going other than this entry right here that says it's 2:45 p.m.?
No, my rough field notes is when I started previously.
Do you still have those?
No, I do not.
So we just have to rely on your memory. Is that right?
As far as the time of breaks and the time I approached.
And who came and went, right?
Correct.
You're a sergeant.
Yes.
And you were a sergeant then.
Yes.
October 31st, Lieutenant Lang is above you in rank.
Correct.
And was on that day.
Correct.
Lieutenant Lang was in the hierarchy, what, 4th highest ranking officer?
At the department?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Did it ever enter your mind that one of your superior officers might want to plant evidence inside the RAV4?
Absolutely not.
Nothing you would have been in your wildest imagination thinking of.
Absolutely not.
So when you were watching that RAV4, it was not with the thought in mind that I better make sure none of my superiors are coming in here and touching this vehicle planting evidence, right?
I'm not sure what you mean.
That wasn't a purpose of your watching the vehicle, to make sure that one of your superiors couldn't gain access to it and do something with it, was it?
I was securing the vehicle for any persons.
Okay. By the way, would you put that back up there for a moment, please? I'm sorry, it keeps cutting out. Can you zoom out?
Sure.
Not quite that far. One more, please. That's good. That's good. The direction that you approach, which is now the upper left-hand corner, was to the southeast of the pond, right?
You're asking where I approached?
Yeah, I think you showed us that you approached from the southeast corner.
Proceeded from the north, traveling southeast.
There's actually other ways to get to that rare vehicle, aren't there? From the west?
Correct.
From the south?
Correct.
Or any one of these rows on the right-hand side of the photograph leading, again, approaching from the west?
Correct.
And just, that's all, thank you.
Any redirect?
If I could have just a moment, Judge.
Sure.
Sergeant Orth, do you recall the color of the memory card or the paper that had the writing on it?
I'm not certain. I believe it was white because the name seemed to jump out at me.
My point is, what was the other general color in the back of the vehicle? Was it light or dark?
A darker colored background.
Was there something about the memory card or the writing that stood out, or was a contrast in color to the surrounding location?
If I remember correctly, it was like a white background with blue or black ink. I think blue. I just glanced in real, like when I looked in the front window, it was just glancing in to look for a person, and when I looked in the back, it was just a glance for the most part, but it did jump out.
So you didn't see dark blood on the dark interior?
No, I did not.
That's all I have, Judge. Thank you.
Nothing further.
All right, you are excused.
State would call Lieutenant Hermann to the stand.
If the jury wishes to stand, I will give you that privilege.
Please raise your right hand. Please be seated. Please state your name and spell your last name for the record.
My name is Tod Hermann, Hermann.
Dr. Hermann, how are you employed?
I'm employed with the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department.
And what rank do you hold?
At this present time, I'm Deputy Inspector for the department.
On November 5th of 2005, what rank did you hold at that time?
I was a patrol lieutenant in charge of the 4 a.m. to noon shift.
On November 5th, do you recall receiving a dispatch call or direction to proceed to a property known as the Avery Salvage Yard?
Yes.
Did you proceed to that location?
Yes, I did.
And do you recall about what time you arrived at that location?
It was approximately 11:03 in the morning.
At 11:03 on the 5th of November, tell the jury what you did and what you saw.
At that point, I traveled down Avery Road, had information about the Hallbach vehicle missing, and that it was located by a search party in the Avery salvage yard. I drove down into the salvage yard near a vehicle car crusher where Sergeant Orth's vehicle was parked, and that's where I stopped with my squad. I met with Detective Remaker, and we proceeded down a path to where Sergeant Orth was. We proceeded towards the Hallbach vehicle to identify it, to identify if there was anything in the vehicle. Detective Remaker and Sergeant Orth walked up to the vehicle, and I stayed just a short distance behind them, away from the vehicle.
About how far from behind the vehicle did you stop?
I was out of reach of the vehicle, anywhere from 3 to 7 feet or so.
My question is, were you close enough to see what Detective Remaker and Sergeant Orth were doing?
Yes.
Did you maintain constant visual connection with both the vehicle and with those two gentlemen at the same time?
Yes, I did.
Did you see either Sergeant Orth or Detective Remaker either enter the vehicle or otherwise disturb the vehicle?
No, I did. They did not.
If they did, would you have seen it?
Yes, I would have.
Now, Mr. Herman, on the property or at your location at that time, did you see a gentleman by the name of Lieutenant Link?
No, I did not.
Did you see a gentleman by the name of Sergeant Colburn?
No, I did not.
You certainly know those two individuals.
Yes, I do.
If they would have been there, would you have recognized them?
Yes, I would have.
After Sergeant Orth and Detective Remaker completed their inspection of the vehicle, did you see what they did?
Yes, they walked back away from the vehicle towards me, and we walked away from the vehicle.
Okay, what did you do then?
Sergeant Orth, as we were walking out, I had Sergeant Orth stay within a view of the vehicle. He was approximately 10 feet away from the rear of the vehicle, so he could maintain visual contact with the vehicle and make sure it wasn't disturbed. Myself and Detective Remaker walked up away from the scene back towards where the squad cars were parked by the vehicle crusher.
Are you familiar with the term scene security?
Yes, I am.
And which officer was primarily responsible for securing the RAV4 or maintaining scene security at that time?
When we left Sergeant Orth there to maintain visual contact, he was mainly in charge of watching that vehicle.
I guess what I'm asking to clear up for the jury is that was Sergeant Orth's primary responsibility from what you knew at that location?
At that point, yes.
That's what I'm asking at that point.
Yes.
Was that responsibility, that is, scene security, sometime shortly thereafter turned over to a different department?
Yes, it was.
Which department was that?
Calumet County Sheriff.
And after being turned over to Calumet County Sheriff, did your department, that is, the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department, ever reassume responsibility for the scene or scene security?
No.
Mr. Herman, were you involved in the decisions or the discussion of turning over responsibility of this investigation to Calumet County, or was that done by somebody else?
Yes, I was present during the exchange when we spoke with Sheriff Poggle.
Let me just ask, about how long after your arrival at that scene was it that Calumet County officials arrived?
Approximately 40 to 45 minutes, 11:40, 11:45, I believe it was.
Any time within that 40 or 45 minutes that you were there before Calumet County arrived, did you see any officers or any citizen for that matter either enter or in any way disturb that vehicle?
No, nobody disturbed that vehicle during that time.
That was something that was important to you. Is that right?
That is correct, yes.
Why?
Because it is a vehicle that we were looking for, potential evidence. We didn't want to disturb it.
Did you have occasion, Mr. Herman, to meet with and speak with either Pam or Nicole Sturm on scene?
Yes, I did.
Describe their demeanor generally, if you recall.
They were very shook up, very upset that they found the vehicle.
Now, I do understand that Sergeant Orth was already on scene when you got there.
Yes.
Who was the second officer to arrive? Was that you, or was that somebody else?
Me and myself and Detective Remaker were there right at the same time, shortly. We would have been the second officer or officers on the scene within minutes, we were there after Sergeant Orth.
Can you tell the jury, please, who, other than Sheriff Jerry Poggle of the Calumet County Department, in fact the sheriff, other than Mr. Poggle, who was involved in ultimately deciding whether this investigation or the scene would be transferred to another agency?
Deputy Inspector Shetter, I spoke with, he in turnover would have been in contact with Inspector Hermann of the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department. I had gotten that information from the deputy inspector. Basically, he discussed that matter with me.
All right. So you had some input into that decision. Is that right?
Yes, I did.
Lastly, Mr. Hermann, the scene or integrity of the SUV being Sergeant Orth's responsibility, was Sergeant Orth provided with any relief or any breaks while he was on that location?
Yes, he was.
And who provided breaks or break relief for him?
I did provide 2 breaks for Sergeant Orth during his visual observation of the vehicle.
While providing those breaks, did you maintain constant visual contact then with the vehicle?
Yes, I did.
At any time during those 2 brief breaks, again, did any individual, citizen, or law enforcement officer enter or disturb that vehicle?
No, nobody disturbed the vehicle.
That's all the questions I have of this witness, Your Honor.
Mr. Buting.
Mr. Hermann, or do you go by Deputy Inspector Hermann? Is that?
That is my current title, correct?
I will call you Deputy Inspector Hermann. Thank you. Are you Inspector now?
Deputy Inspector.
Deputy Inspector. Okay. Now, November 5th of 2005, you were a lieutenant, right?
That is correct.
And you obviously knew Lieutenant James Lank, right?
Yes, I did.
He was also a lieutenant in your department.
Yes.
Would you explain to me a little bit about the hierarchy back then? Who was at the top? Who was the top sheriff at the time?
Sheriff Ken Peterson.
Okay. And immediately below him, second in command, would be who?
Inspector Hermann.
Okay. And then that's Robert Hermann, right?
Correct.
Brother or relative?
That's brother.
That's your brother. Okay.
Yes.
And then does it branch down into one or more deputy inspectors?
Yes.
How many?
There's a deputy inspector in charge of the jail, deputy inspector in charge of patrol and investigative division, and deputy inspector in charge of our support.
Okay. And so November 5th of 2005, who were those 3 deputy inspectors? Shatter?
Deputy Inspector Shetter was in charge of operations at that time.
Okay.
Deputy Inspector Larry Welnicke was in charge of the jail, and I believe Deputy Inspector Bill Beck was in charge of support.
Okay. And then the next level below, that is lieutenants.
Yes.
And how many lieutenants were there?
3 lieutenants.
That would be yourself?
In charge of, as far as patrol division is concerned, there's 3 lieutenants. Myself, Lieutenant Singh, and I believe it was Lieutenant Bessler at the time.
Okay. And that's your division was the patrol division, right?
Yes.
And then is there also lieutenant of the detective bureau?
That's correct. Lieutenant James Link.
So he would have been the top dog in the detective bureau at the time, basically, right?
Yes.
And you have already mentioned that his decision to transfer authority, but let me just make sure we're clear. You were aware about Mr. Avery's civil lawsuit against your department and Manitowoc County for the years that he spent on the wrongful conviction case, right?
Yes.
And the concern was pretty obvious to you, as soon as this vehicle was discovered on his family's property, that maybe there might be an appearance of a conflict, if not an actual conflict, for your department to be investigating this case. Isn't that right?
Yes.
By the way, were you deposed in that lawsuit? Did you go through any depositions yourself?
No, I did not.
Do you know whether, and did you know at that time whether or not Lieutenant James Lang had gone through any depositions in that lawsuit?
I'm not aware of that.
I'm talking about November 5th right now, okay?
Yes.
You weren't aware of that, right?
Whether or not Lieutenant Link had been deposed in any
Yes.
Civil litigation,
Right.
I'm not aware of it.
And you were not aware of it then?
No.
What about Sergeant Andrew Colburn? Were you aware he had been deposed as a witness in that lawsuit?
Not to my recollection. I don't recall if he was or he was not. The same for as far as Lieutenant Link. I don't recall if he was or if he was not.
So it's
at that time.
It's possible that you were aware of it. You're just not sure right now. Is that what you're telling me?
I don't recall at this point. I don't recall if he was or was not.
Okay. But at any rate, it was pretty common knowledge. Would you say pretty much every member of the Manitowoc Sheriff's Department was aware of Mr. Avery's lawsuit against them?
Yes.
Okay. Now you talk about this decision to turn over the lead of this investigation of this case on November 5th, 2005. And you said that was about 45 minutes after the first officer arrived, right?
Yes.
So by 11:45 in the morning, the decision had already been made that you should pass this off to Calumet, right?
Yes.
Excuse me, Mr. Buting. I think you are just starting to get into something that I am sure is going to continue for a while. So to help with the flow of things...
It might not, but that's okay. We can take a break now.
We'll take our afternoon break at this time.
Thank you, Your Honor. I think we were talking about the decision to transfer the lead authority in the investigation to Calumet. Was it about 11:45 a.m., right?
Yes.
Actually, I'm going to come back to that in just a moment, but let me ask you this first. You parked, when you first pulled up to the southeast area of the salvage yard, you parked near the crusher, is that right?
Yes. Somewhere in that general area, yes.
Oh, okay. And did you look at the crusher? Did it appear to be in operating order, or could you tell?
I don't know how it, I know, I have an idea of how it operates. Whether or not it was working at the time, it was not running when I arrived.
Did you see a bunch of flattened, crushed cars stacked by?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And when you walked up to the Toyota RAV4, did you see any indication at all that maybe somebody had tried to crush it and failed, or had started to crush it and failed?
No, I did not.
It was completely intact as far as you could tell.
Yes.
Even though there was a crusher nearby that could have, if someone knew how to use it, could have been flattened that RAV4 to a pancake, right?
If the crusher was working, yes, correct. They could. The vehicle could have been crushed.
Okay. And if that would have been done to that RAV4, it would have been a pretty unrecognizable vehicle at that point, right? Unless you start ripping it apart.
I don't know. As far as emblems or whatever would be visible, I guess I can't make assumptions unless you see a vehicle like that crushed.
It would be a lot less recognizable than it was when you saw it.
Yes, it would have definitely changed the appearance of it.
Okay. And this, by that time, the news or word had been out on the media, the news, missing persons, posters spread all over the place that Teresa's vehicle was a Toyota RAV4, right?
Yes.
And you said, I think you walked up to maybe I'm confusing you with the prior witness, but as you approached the vehicle, it appeared as if somebody had been trying to conceal it.
Yes, I did not testify to that, but it did appear that way to me.
I'm sorry, I may be morphing you into the prior witness, but in fact, the effort to conceal it, this Toyota RAV4, wasn't that good, was it? I mean, it wasn't covered.
No, not completely.
And in fact, counsel, if you could put up that right now, I would appreciate it. As you walked up to the rear of it, this is what you see. Great big letters, RAV4 Toyota, right?
Yes.
Exhibit 29, counsel.
Exhibit 29, we're showing to the jury right now. The hood that was leaning up against the side of the vehicle is over here on the right side of the picture, right? I'm not sure this is even here, but there was a big vehicle hood leaning up against the passenger side, right?
Yes.
An old rusty piece of junk, correct?
An old hood, yes. I believe it may be in the photo just to the right of the post.
All the way over here,
I believe that
part of it there.
would be part of it, yes. Yes, it was right up against it.
Now, if that hood had been pulled up against the back of this vehicle, you wouldn't be able to see the tire cover that says RAV4 Toyota, would you?
No, you would not have been able to.
Okay. And this vehicle was along that little ridge where all of the other vehicles were single file parked, nose to bumper, nose to bumper. And this was the only one that was double parked, right? Too deep, sticking out.
I'm not sure how many vehicles were double parked or single parked, but this one was double parked, correct?
Okay. Could we maybe put up that number 89? What we were looking at before, that one, the aerial view. Any aerial of that area is fine. There we go. Thank you.
Want me to zoom in?
One more. Okay. So looking at that line of vehicles that is parked along the berm of the north or south side of the pond here, all the rest of those vehicles look like they are single. Any other double parked?
Yes, it appears that way. They are all single parked.
Okay. This is Exhibit 86 for the record. Thank you.
Counsel, excuse me for a second. Can at least one attorney from each side approach?
We better clear something up, Lieutenant. This photograph was taken after the Toyota RAV4 has already been removed from the scene, correct?
I don't know when it was taken.
Actually, Judge, we'll stipulate to that fact. We'll complete the record later, but that is a stipulation that we're willing to not only alert the jury, but the witness at this time.
For the benefit of the record and the jurors, counsel, do I understand, and I know there's been a series of aerial photos introduced, do I understand that all of those photos were taken after the date that the vehicle was removed from the scene?
Yes.
That's correct.
Both parties understanding?
Yes. There are now, at least that we have seen so far, we have not seen any aerial shots with the RAV4 still in this location.
Thank you.
Okay. But you do recall where it was. Well, actually, we'll leave that for another witness. So after you approached that 3 to 7 feet, you said, from the vehicle, you didn't actually look inside the vehicle yourself, right?
I did not, no.
Oh, okay. And then you retreated back to where the cars were parked.
Yes.
And then you had some other duties that you attended to. You mentioned that you gave Sergeant Orth a couple of breaks, I think.
Yes, I did.
But in between those times, there was an hour or more in between that. You were doing other things, right?
I was standing by in that area, yes.
Okay. But for instance, you were talking with Deputy Inspector Shatter.
Yes.
And I believe you said
Detective Remaker.
Detective Remaker and Sheriff Pagel. And you were going through that whole decision-making process about transferring authority, lead authority over to Calumet, right?
Yes.
And so there was a meeting going on down there and you guys were focused on that, right?
Yes, we were in that discussion, correct.
And you also, for a period of time, spoke with Earl Avery, right?
Yes, I did.
He, after seeing all the congregation down there, whatever, he started coming down on a four-wheel. What do you call those? ATVs?
Yes, he did.
Okay. And then, so you asked him some questions about the crusher.
Yes, I did.
And then at some point, first, do you know how long it was before you left the crusher area and retreated to the command post that was being set up over by the entrance way to the Avery Road? And
Without looking at a report, I do not recall the time that I left the area of the car crusher.
well, I'm not sure that the report will help, but I will let you take a look at it. Maybe it will refresh your recollection. It's page 10 and 11 of 22.
I did not have the time listed as to what time we left the area and went back to the car or to the end of Avery Road.
Okay, but you think it was an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours? You don't have any recollection today about how long that was?
No.
At some point you did, though, retreat to the area that later at command post was put up there right at the entrance to the business area, right?
Yes.
Okay, but before that, there was an incident that occurred. If you could put number 86 back up for just a moment, just at that distance is fine, I think.
Like this?
Yeah, just leave it like that way. There was an incident that occurred where it turned out that there were a number of civilians who had somehow managed to find their way onto the Avery property, right?
I don't believe it was onto the Avery property. It was into the car area. It was to the south of the car area.
But it turned out there was like 4 or 5 people walking in, approaching from the south through the gravel pit, right?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
And it turned out that these were friends of Teresa trying to help. Nothing wrong with that. They were just seeing if they could help, right?
They were part of the search team, yes.
Okay. And they actually got all the way up to the southwest area. There was no perimeter guard at the southwest area of the 40-acre lot at the time, right?
Correct. There was not.
And when you talked to them, you were all the way over by the gravel conveyor by that time, correct?
Yes.
All right. Did you put a guard in there at that point on the southwest area, or did that come later?
I did not, and I'm not aware of any guard that was placed there. I did not put anybody up there.
Okay. That wasn't your responsibility. Somebody else may have, but you had nothing to do with any of that.
Correct.
Okay. Just a couple of other things to clear up. Even though the decision was made to transfer lead authority at 11:45 of the overall investigation, that's not when your department transfers security supervision of the RAV4 area, is it?
No, it is not.
In fact, that didn't take place until 2:45 when Sergeant Orth was placed by, I'm sorry, that didn't take place until 3:04 p.m. when Calumet Sergeant Tyson relieved Deputy Cummings of your department. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
So for the first 4 hours that vehicle was sitting on the Avery property, after having been discovered by a member of your department, or I'm sorry, after a member of your department arrived, it was under control, immediate control of members of the Manitowoc Sheriff's Department, correct?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Kratz.
I just have got a few. I'm just going to clear up one thing, Mr. Hermann. Exhibit number 86. I'm going to zoom into the area. Do you recall where the RAV4 was parked as you look at this exhibit? Or if I show you a picture of the RAV4 as Ms. Sturm took it, would that assist you?
That would assist me.
I will show you what has been received into evidence as Exhibit 33. I will just find it and we'll be all set. Exhibit 33, you see a red truck to the left, which would be to the south of that vehicle. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Now, I want to go back to exhibit number 86 and zoom in again. You can see the red truck kind of in the middle of that lane. Is that right?
Yes, that's where it would be parked.
Does that refresh your recollection?
Yes.
That the RAV4 would have been closest to the pond or south of that location, about where my cursor from my computer is at this time. Is that right?
Correct.
With that clarification then, Judge, that's all I have of this witness.
Anything else from the defence?
None, Your Honor.
Members of the jury, at this time, counsel and I have a matter to take up in chambers, so we're going to take a break at this time. I will have to let you know whether we'll be resuming with additional testimony today or whether you will be excused early. But we'll get the message to you in the jury room as soon as we know. If this is our final farewell for the day, I remind you again not to watch any news media accounts of this case or discuss it with anyone in any manner. Thank you. Before we go off the record, I want to reflect that the court asked the parties for a brief sidebar conference, and the sole purpose of that conference was to clarify what the court had previously understood to be the agreement of the parties, and that is that all of the aerial photos which have been shown to the jury today were in fact taken after the RAV4 had been removed from the property. I have brought that issue up to the attorneys earlier because I didn't think it had been made clear to the jurors when the photos were taken, and I didn't want to have them looking for something that wasn't there. And I believe that the parties indicated previously at the same point that would be placed on the record, and I just asked attorneys if today was the day. Anything else, counsel, before we break?
No.
No.
I will see you in chambers.